Belinda presents this unabridged recording of Beyond a Broken Sky, written by Suzanne Fortin and read by Tamsin Kennard. Dedicated to the English village of East Chinook and Anton Gunther. We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. Martin Luther King, Jr. Chapter 1. Rhoda, 2022. She liked to come out here when the first craggy fingers of dawn were breaking across the horizon, when she could hear nothing but the lap of the water against her ears as she floated on her back, turned away from the shore, and gazing out as the morning sun broke cover, when the world rotated and another day tempted her with the promises of good times and better things to come. And when she hoped that by the time the earth had turned on its axis, those promises would be fulfilled. Rhoda had already looked at her social media accounts that day. The hope that one morning she would wake up to the news she longed for never left her. Because if she didn't have hope, what did she have? The crunch of feet on the stony West Sussex beach broke through the stillness, and Rhoda rolled onto her front, casting a casual glance towards the sound. It was Shani, another early morning swimmer. A veteran compared to Rhoda's 5 years of open water swimming, Shani had been taking a dip in the sea every day since she was in her late teens. Rhoda had never asked Shani how old she was, but she had to be in her 70s. The salt water clearly hadn't done her any harm. Shani waved as she slipped off her towel and, barefooted, trotted across the pebbles and shingle as if she was walking on a deep pile carpet, unlike Rhoda, who still picked her way gingerly across the painful terrain. They exchanged good mornings as Shani dipped her shoulders under the water and swam out towards Rhoda. "Rather fresh this morning," said Shani. "Roll on the summer." It was April, and although the air temperature was warming up, the sea was still cold. "So, what's on the agenda this week?" Shani always took an interest in Rhoda's work and posed the same question every Monday morning. "I'm going to look at a chapel in Somerset today. It's on a privately owned farm." "Somerset? That's a bit of a way." "Yes, but it will be worth it. The chapel has a rather special stained glass window that needs looking at. Apparently, it was made by an Italian prisoner of war. Looks like the chapel is being relocated to the museum," Rhoda explained, swimming breaststroke alongside her friend. The local museum at Singlewood, where Rhoda rented a workshop and undertook some freelance work for them from time to time, was located on 50 acres of Sussex countryside, with over 60 historic buildings on site, together with gardens, walks, and a mill pond. First opened in the early 1970s, when the local village rallied together to save a medieval banquet hall due for demolition to make way for a new bypass, the museum had grown from there. And now, the charitable trust was hoping the chapel would be its latest addition. "I've got to go down and make an assessment of the glass window." "A POW, you say? It's easy to forget we had plenty of POW camps in England during the war." "It is fascinating, really," said Rhoda. "I'm interested to see what the workmanship was like. I've been sent pictures of the window, but I'm looking forward to seeing it in real life." They spent another 5 minutes in the sea before Rhoda needed to leave. She had a stained glass commission she wanted to deliver on her way to Somerset that morning. "I'll see you later in the week," she called, as she picked up her towel and wrapped it around her wet hair. She pulled her other towel around her shoulders and slipped her feet into her flip-flops. Shani waved from the water, and Rhoda headed back to the flat, where she had lived for over 5 years now. Although it was tiny, she wouldn't swap it for the world. She'd worked 2 jobs and saved every penny she had in order to get together enough for a deposit. And despite tying herself into a mortgage for what was probably the rest of her working life, to Rhoda, it was worth every single penny. It was hers, and no one could take that away from her. She had a home and the security that went along with that. She could have afforded something bigger and more modern, had she been willing to compromise on location, but she'd hated the thought of not being able to wake up to the sound of the sea crashing on the shoreline and the seagulls squawking overhead. It gave her a sense of freedom, something which had been lacking during the years she'd spent growing up in care of the local authority. Back in her apartment, Rhoda showered and dressed for the day ahead. But before she set off on her drive to Somerset, she sat down with a cup of tea and opened the social media apps on her phone for the second time that day. First, she opened the Facebook page, Dean Sullivan, Missing Person, and scrolled down for any new comments or messages. She had the alerts on, but she still liked to check, just in case something slipped through the notifications. There was nothing. No comments, no messages, no new information, and one unfollow. That hurt the most. Someone had lost interest in her brother's disappearance. Someone had given up on him ever being found. Someone no longer cared. Rhoda took a sip of her tea. There were still 209 members. 209 people who still cared about Dean. Rhoda uploaded a picture she'd taken that morning down on the beach. She'd caught the sun just as it had tipped the horizon. She added the caption, "Another day passes and we are still thinking of you, Dean. Please get in touch if you see this. We miss you." She tried to post every week to keep the page active, in the hope it would jog someone's memory. There were 209 people out there who would be reminded that her brother was still missing. 209 people who might otherwise forget as the years rolled on. Next, she checked the UK Missing Persons page. It had been updated overnight with a picture of a muddy trainer placed next to a tape measure. Scottish police had found the footwear and human remains washed up on the west coast. Rhoda looked at the picture. Was it the sort of trainer Dean would wear? Was he even in Scotland, or had he ever gone to Scotland? She had no idea. A lot could happen in 10 years. She peered closely at the trainer. Nike, size 8, according to the information. Dean was a size 9. She sighed, and hoped a family would be able to identify the shoe. At least they would have some sort of closure, even if it was the worst possible outcome. The drive down to Somerset was stress-free, with only a little traffic congestion, as Rhoda went through the New Forest, making a detour to New Milton, where she dropped off the commissioned piece of glass she'd been working on for the past month. It was for a feature stairwell of a converted barn, and the owners had sought Rhoda out through her website. Rhoda had been particularly pleased with this job, as it was a substantial amount of money and meant it covered the majority of her bills for the next 2 months, with enough to reinvest into the business and cover her living expenses. Meeting her bills was a constant source of pressure, but Rhoda couldn't ever imagine herself working for anyone. She liked being her own boss. She liked the autonomy which came with it. And for her, that balanced, and in some cases outweighed, the burden and loneliness of independence. The Somerset farm, Telton Hall, where the chapel was situated, was part of a compulsory purchase order. It stood on the outskirts of a small village where a sea of green hills rolled out beyond. The views were stunning, and Rhoda couldn't help mourning a little for the loss of the environment once the ground workers came in and flattened everything to make way for over 3,000 new homes. Telton Hall was situated on the edge of the village, behind a creamy-coloured stone wall. 2 piers heralded the entrance to the farm. Rhoda came to an abrupt halt in the road. Blocking her way, preventing her from swinging into the drive, was a tractor. A blue Massey Ferguson, to be precise, and sitting in the cab was an elderly man. Rhoda reversed a little to allow the tractor through. She flashed her lights and put up her hand to the farmer. He glared back at her, but made no effort to move. It wasn't until Rhoda switched off the car radio and buzzed down her window that she realised the tractor's engine wasn't even running. Had it broken down? Rhoda drummed her fingers on the steering wheel for a moment. waiting to see if anything was going to happen. But the farmer didn't look to be in any hurry to move the vehicle, or even to get out of his cab. She decided to go over and speak to him. "Morning," she called up to the cab. "I have an appointment at Telton Hall. Would you be able to let me in, please?" Now she was closer, Rhoda estimated the farmer to be in his mid-70s, and it struck her that he might actually be the owner of the farm. "Mr. Hartwell?" He looked down at her.
"Yes. You from the museum?"
"Yes, that's right. Rhoda Sullivan." She smiled up at him, pleased with the breakthrough. "I've come to have a look at the stained glass window."
"I know."
He sat back in his seat and looked straight ahead. Well, this wasn't quite going to plan. "Could you let me in, please?" She paused, waiting for a response, but there was none. "Or shall I park here on the road and walk in?"
"No one is coming in."
Mr. Hartwell remained staring ahead of him. "But I need to assess the window. Did the museum not explain that to you?"
"Yes, and as I said, no one is coming in."
He moved his gaze to look at her again.
"Not you, not the council, not the developers, not anyone."
Rhoda recognised the steely look of determination in his eyes. Jack Hartwell was deadly serious. "I'm sorry," she said. "There's obviously an issue I don't know about. Is it something I could help with at all?" He gave a snort.
"Ask your boss at the museum. I told him what the school was."
Rhoda took out her phone. She had no idea what Mr. Hartwell was referring to, and she was sure the museum hadn't passed any message on to her about a problem. She scrolled through her emails and text messages, but there was nothing from the museum. She'd have to ring them. "There's been some misunderstanding somewhere, Mr. Hartwell. If you give me a moment, I'm just going to make a phone call." The farmer shrugged.
"Do what you like, but I'm not moving."
Rhoda went back to her car and called the museum office. Eventually, the call was picked up by Eric, one of the managers. Rhoda quickly explained the situation. "So, I'm currently sitting in my car in some sort of standoff with Mr. Hartwell and his tractor."
"Oh, bloody hell, just what we need," said Eric. "I didn't think he was serious. I thought he was just being difficult. Can't you sweet-talk him?"
Rhoda raised her eyebrows. "Sweet talk?
Okay, maybe that's asking a bit much of you."
Eric let out a sigh. "What exactly is the problem?" Rhoda asked.
"He doesn't want to sell. That's why there's a compulsory purchase order on the farm. Even so, I didn't think Hartwell would be that much of a problem."
"Ah, so you're not buying the chapel directly from Mr. Hartwell?" Rhoda wasn't privy to how the charity obtained their buildings. That was all dealt with by the committee. She had simply been asked to assess the stained glass window and the work involved, whether that be carried out back at the museum or in situ.
"No, we're negotiating with the council, who I believe are negotiating with Mr. Hartwell. It's all a bit convoluted. The developers are pushing for a completion date as they want to get started, so that doesn't help either."
"What do you want me to do?"
"Sit tight for now. I'll see if I can speak to him myself."
Rhoda ended the call and sat back in her seat, looking at Jack Hartwell perched in the cab of the tractor. She couldn't help admiring his defiance. She felt a wave of empathy for the man who was being forced, by the council, to move out of his home. It brought back unwelcome memories of her time spent in care and being moved from one place to another without any autonomy or say in the matter. It brought with it a feeling of complete helplessness, the stripping of any power or control over her life. She'd hated that feeling then, and she hated it just as much now. Her heart really did go out to Mr. Hartwell's plight, and she felt guilty for being there. Chapter 2. Alice, 1945. It had been a long day working in Rice's department store, and Alice Renshaw was relieved it was finally over. She made her way down the rear staircase to the ground floor, where her friend Jess was waiting for her. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "Bloody Mrs. Travers made me take an inventory of all the knitting wool." I'm glad I don't have to work in haberdashery, said Jess.
Yeah, menswear is much more exciting than fabric and yarn, agreed Alice.
You wouldn't have thought that today, said Jess. I had to serve a man in his 80s looking for a new shirt. It took ages. He was so fussy. Now, had it been a nice young man or a soldier, that would have been a different matter. But 80? Come on, how is that fair?
Alice laughed as they went out of the rear door of the department store. Maybe you'll find yourself a nice, rich older man, one who has a particular penchant for ties or socks or vests. Jess pulled a face.
It's all right for you to joke about it. At least you've got Loverboy.
Loverboy? If you mean USM and Brett Cunningham, then yes, replied Alice with a grin. She slipped her arm through Jess's.
There's a dance on the base tomorrow night. You're going to come, aren't you? Brett's friend Howard will be there.
Jess shrugged.
I don't know. Howard's got a girlfriend back home in America.
Still come, though, said Alice.
He likes you. As a friend. I don't want to go on my own. Aha! So that's why you want me to go.
No, it's not. We always do things together.
Come on, please, Jess. I've got a spare pair of stockings you can wear.
That's bribery,
but worth it. Sheer nylon with a seam up the back.
Alice raised her eyebrows at her friend. One of the benefits of an American boyfriend was the luxury items that they just couldn't get in England anymore. Jess sighed.
Oh, all right. But can't you see if Brett's got another friend, preferably one that's single?
I'll see what I can do. They caught the bus home and spent the 15-minute journey to their Suffolk village talking about what they were going to wear for the dance. Alice had exhausted every item in her meagre wardrobe since she'd started dating Brett.
I thought I might have a look at my mum's clothes, she said,
tamping down the sadness that accompanied the thought.
That will be nice, said Jess. She'd have loved that.
They're in a suitcase at the back of my wardrobe. Dad wanted to throw them out, but I wouldn't let him. Alice had actually got into a huge row with her dad about the clothes. He'd been all for throwing them on the fire, but Alice hadn't been able to bear the thought. For the same reasons it pained her father to keep any of her mother's possessions, it pained Alice to even contemplate letting them go. In the end, she'd persuaded her dad to let her hold on to them if she promised to keep them tucked away where he wouldn't have to face looking at them on a daily basis. The bus pulled up outside the village shop, and the girls hopped off before walking home. They lived just a few doors apart in a row of terraced cottages, and as they reached Alice's house, she could see the glow of the standard lamp in the living room. Her father worked as a gardener at the big house in the village and got home around the same time as she did.
Have fun tonight, and don't do anything I wouldn't do.
Jess gave a snigger and nudged Alice with her elbow. Alice rolled her eyes and smiled good-humouredly. That doesn't leave a lot. She waved at her friend as they parted company. Alice's father was in the kitchen already, peeling the carrots. "You're late," he said, not looking up.
"Stocktake,"
replied Alice, quickly shrugging off her jacket and hanging it on the back of the door.
"Here, I'll do that, Dad."
She washed her hands at the kitchen sink and took over from her father. She could murder a cuppa, but that would have to wait until she'd sorted tea out. That evening, they were having cauliflower cheese with carrots and bacon. Fortunately, Alice's father was given a small quantity of vegetables each week from Mrs. Armitage up at the big house to supplement their rations. It wasn't long before they were sitting down at the kitchen table, eating their evening meal. The cauliflower cheese was much blander these days, with no cheese going into the actual dish. The small amount of cheese they were allowed each week was grated and sprinkled on the top to give the sauce some sort of flavour. There was a slice of apple pie left over from yesterday's meal, and Alice happily let her father have that. Brett nearly always brought along chocolate of some description with him when they met, so she'd be able to satisfy her sweet tooth later. Once she'd cleared the table and done the dishes, Alice sprinted up the stairs to get herself washed and changed. She'd wear one of her everyday dresses for seeing Brett that evening. They weren't going anywhere special,
just for a walk along the riverbank. Now and again, Brett took her to the village pub, but it invariably drew some sort of complaint from her father once the village gossips had got to work. It wasn't that the villagers minded Brett. In fact, they were very welcoming of the American servicemen, who were always polite and respectful. For some reason, though, her dad wasn't so impressed. Alice wasn't even convinced his disapproval was because Brett was American. She was pretty sure her father wouldn't like any man she saw, because then he'd have to admit she was a grown woman and might just marry and leave him. Then who would be there to do all the cooking and cleaning? Alice let out a sigh as she brushed her hair. It was a mean-spirited thought, and as her gaze fell on the photograph of her mother resting against the mirror, Alice immediately felt guilty. She turned her thoughts back to Brett and the excitement of seeing him. It was a surefire way to bolster her mood. As she came downstairs, ready to go, her father looked up at her.
I take it you're off out tonight?
Yes, I'm meeting Brett, said Alice, trying to sound casual.
You're still seeing him, then?
Of course.
Her father gave a snort. Don't go getting yourself too attached. You know what those Yanks are like. Anyway, he'll be off before you know it. Might not even come back.
Alice held in the sigh that threatened to escape. She was sure somewhere deep inside her father was only looking out for her. But sometimes she'd just wished he would be a bit happier for her. Brett's a nice bloke, Dad, she said. He's not like that. Her father put down the paper he was reading.
You can't say that until it's put to the test. You mark my words, half of them have got a girlfriend or wife back home.
Half of them are young men who haven't got anything of the sort, retorted Alice. She didn't really know why she was arguing with her father. He was a stubborn old sod at times. Anyway, let's not fall out about it. I'll see you later. It was often a fine line they trod with each other these days, neither wanting to give way to the other, but equally neither wanting to get into a full-blown argument. Going head-to-head with each other without her mother to reason with them and diffuse the tension was not a good idea. Alice pulled her coat around her. She missed her mother so much. She had always been optimistic and happy. She had brought a sense of joy wherever she went. Since her death 2 years earlier, Alice wasn't sure her father had laughed once, let alone smiled. Alice hurried through the village towards the bridge, which was her and Brett's usual meeting place. She felt particularly tired that evening and put it down to the long day at work. Ideally, she'd like to be tucked up in bed right now with a good book, but she didn't want to give up the opportunity of seeing Brett. The American servicemen got a lot of free time while they were here, but Alice was aware it was borrowed time, and Brett could be called up at any moment to go on a bombing mission. She couldn't bear the notion of him not coming back, and shrugged away the gloomy thoughts. As she turned the corner from the high street, she could see the tall frame of Brett Cunningham standing on the bridge, leaning rather laconically against the wooden railing, smoking a cigarette. He looked like the lead actor in a Hollywood movie. Alice's breath caught in her throat as he saw her and smiled, flicking his cigarette into the water and pushing himself away from the bridge. "Hi," he said, as she reached him. He pulled her in towards him and kissed her on the mouth. Alice felt the thrill of excitement and wrapped her arms around his neck. She didn't care if anyone saw them. As they pulled out of their embrace, Brett produced 2 bars of chocolate from his pocket. "Here, thought you might like these." "Oh, thank you." Alice popped them into her bag. She'd quite like to scoff at least 1 bar right now, but she really should show some restraint. "And I have these for you." Brett presented 2 packets of silk stockings.
"You said your friend Jess needed some."
"Oh, you're ace," declared Alice. "Thanks so much." After she put the stockings in her bag, along with the chocolate bars, they began to walk along the river path. Brett took her hand, and Alice felt an overwhelming surge of love for him. It didn't surprise her. She'd known she was falling in love with him soon after they started dating. If she was honest, she was already in love with him.
They reached the spot on the riverbank where they liked to sit. It was a few minutes' walk out of the village, where a large willow tree bowed over the riverbank. Its hanging branches provided a curtain of privacy on one side, and a wall of bulrushes stood proud in the water on the other side of them, effectively hiding them from view. They made themselves comfortable on the grass bank, and Brett trailed a finger up her arm, across her shoulder, brushing her neck and jawline. "You're so beautiful," he said softly, his fingers now finding her hair and gently teasing some strands free from the pins. Alice gave an embarrassed laugh. She pulled up her legs and rested her hands and face on her knees, looking sideways at him. "You're not so bad yourself." "Why is it you British girls can't take a compliment?" "Us British girls? Have you tried that line on lots of others, then?" Alice noted the unexpected prickle in her voice. "Only you," replied Brett. "I'm just going by what the other guys have said." "You talk about me, do you?" Again, Alice was more annoyed than she wanted to be. "Hey, don't take offense. That's exactly what I mean. I talk about you because I can't believe how lucky I am. I want everyone to know what a beautiful girl I have." He smiled at her, and any annoyance Alice felt was swept away. Brett moved in and kissed her shoulder. "Good job I don't take offense. I'm not like the others. I value what I have." Alice couldn't help smiling. She'd never known anyone like Brett before, certainly none of the other lads in the village. They wouldn't dream of talking so openly or tenderly to a woman. Christ, they'd more likely talk lovingly to their bloody cows before they would their girlfriend. I love you." She'd said it before she had time to think about it. She swallowed as Brett froze in his caressing of her. His face turned serious, all the humour disappearing in an instant. Oh, God, she shouldn't have said anything. She should have just kept that thought to herself. She shook her head and looked away, trying to blink back the tears of humiliation. "Ignore me," she muttered. "I was just being silly." His hand found hers. "You're not being silly at all, and I have no intention of ignoring you." Alice turned back to him. He was so handsome and so different from any man she'd ever come across before. His dark hair, deep brown eyes, and smooth, flawless skin set him apart from all the others. He was exotic by comparison to all the boys she had grown up with. Brett leaned closer and kissed her, his hands finding her hairpins, discarding them so her hair cascaded over her shoulders. "So beautiful," he murmured. Alice closed her eyes. She didn't care they were on the riverbank. She didn't care there was a war raging in Europe. She didn't care what her dad would think if he knew, or what her mum would think if she could have known. She didn't care about anything. Only being in that moment with Brett, the man she loved. Chapter 3. Nate, 2022. Nate Hartwell had got the call half an hour before, telling him that his father was staging some sort of protest in his driveway. The call had come from his Aunt Aggie, who lived across the road in Telton Cottage. "I don't know what your father's up to now, but he's got the bloody tractor parked across the driveway and refusing to allow anyone in," she'd reported to him. Nate could imagine Aggie peering through the net curtain of her living room window from her wing-back chair as she observed the comings and goings of the village of Telton. He was just seconds from the village, perhaps going a little faster than he should, when he rounded the bend, and he had to steer sharply to avoid an estate car parked on the side of the road. Nate swore under his breath at the near miss, but his attention was distracted at the sight of his father sitting in the cab of the tractor. He pulled up at the gateway and got out of his car. It was a warm day for April, and Nate rolled up his shirt sleeves, leaving his jacket on the passenger seat. "All right, Dad?" he called up to the cab, lifting his sunglasses to his forehead so he could make eye contact. "Nate," Jack replied in acknowledgement. "Don't tell me. Aggie phoned you." Nate gave a sigh and replaced his glasses. What are you up to? Just passing the time of day. Got nothing better to do. Nate checked his watch. Haven't you got an appointment about now? Jack shrugged. What if I have? You're going to have to let them in. Who says? Come on, Dad. You can't stop people doing their job. Nate rested his hands on his hips. It was a conversation he'd had plenty of times with his father. Much as no one liked it, the purchase order had been pushed through, and Telton Hall was going to be developed. They'd done everything they could to stop it, and Nate thought his father had accepted his fate. Why are you doing all this now, Dad? Because I want to, and because I can. I don't want anyone here. He gave a nod down the road, and as Nate turned to follow his gaze, he noticed someone sitting in the driver's seat of the car he'd nearly run into. Is that the council? Asked Nate. Museum. Ah, the chapel. Nate recalled details of the last email that his father had shown him. Look, Dad, you need to let them see the chapel. The museum has nothing to do with the purchase order. They're going to be preserving a part of the farm. They're kind of on our side. Our side? Questioned Jack. Didn't think we were on the same side. You're all for letting them take the farm without a fight. That wasn't strictly true, and it was disingenuous of his father to suggest otherwise. But Nate didn't feel now was the time to argue over petty details. He'd done everything he could to help his father fight the compulsory purchase order. Everything legal, that is. He wasn't about to condone his father's actions. Obstructing the valuation might not technically be illegal, but it certainly wasn't acceptable. Nate glanced back again at the estate car, and then at his father. Look, Dad, you've made your point. You've caused a bit of inconvenience, but it's pointless. You're not going to stop it going ahead. Nate tried again with a more sympathetic approach. To his own ears, he sounded like he was talking to his 10-year-old son, Isaac, gently trying to coax him to do something, like when Isaac wouldn't come out of his room last weekend when he didn't want to go back to his mum's. Why don't you take the tractor back to the barn and let them have a look at the chapel? It's not achieving anything sitting here, plus it will save a load of grief from the council. Nate turned around at the sound of a car door closing and footsteps approaching. It was the occupant of the car, a woman in her mid to late 20s, not looking particularly official in her jeans, t-shirt and hoodie. Her dark hair was tied up in a ponytail. She looked more like she was off on a casual hike. Hi, she said with a smile. I'm Rhoda Sullivan from Singlewood Museum in West Sussex. Hi, Nate Hartwell, Jack Hartwell's son, he said, and then added, Sorry about this. He's not taking the sale of the farm too well. So I understand. I won't bore you with the details, but it's a CPO, compulsory purchase order, new housing and all that. Nate gave a pleading look in his father's direction. Which is why he's not happy to see me, replied the woman. Yeah, you could say that. No offence. None taken. She hesitated, but then spoke again. I'd be the same if someone wanted to take my home away from me. She looked in the direction of Telton Hall. Nate wasn't certain, but he thought he could detect Rhoda's underlying sense of disapproval that he wasn't sympathetic to his father's plight. There's more than one reason why he can't keep the farm on, Nate found himself replying. Telton Hall is a beautiful house. Not quite what I was expecting when I was told it was a farm, said Rhoda, looking back at Nate. It was turned into more of a working farm during the First World War, explained Nate, and has been ever since then, through the Second World War, right up until today. Are they going to develop Telton Hall or pull it down? Apartments, I believe. How long before your father has to be out? She asked a lot of questions. Nate replied politely, 12 weeks. Not that long, then. Has he got somewhere else to go? Moving in with you? Nate wasn't quite sure how any of it was this woman's business, and again, there was that slight edge to her voice, as if she didn't really approve of what was happening. He could do without any judgment on her part. The past 2 years had been a nightmare, between trying to negotiate with the council and placate his father. Look, I'm sorry, but you may be wasting your day waiting for him. He can be very stubborn when he wants to be.
Rhoda pursed her lips and made a clicking noise with her tongue. I'm really sorry, but I need to look at the chapel today. My boss is pressing me for a report. If we leave it too late, we might not have enough time to make all the arrangements to move it.
I'm doing my best, said Nate, feeling irritated.
He knew she was just doing her job, but she really had no idea how obstinate his father could be. He wasn't sure if it was the frustration at his father perched up in the cab of the tractor that was stressing him, or Rhoda Sullivan's tone of disapproval towards him. Nate was glad when her phone began ringing, and she excused herself to take the call. He went over to the tractor, hoisted himself up onto the side steps, and opened the cab door so he was level with his dad.
Honestly, Dad, you need to back this up now and let the woman in to view the chapel. You know they are perfectly within their rights to call the police, he continued. Imagine all the fuss of you being forcibly removed and carted off down the police station. All this is pointless.
Nate felt sorry for his dad. He knew how much it would hurt his dad's pride to give in. Mr. Hartwell! It was the woman from the museum calling up to them. Nate and his father both looked down at her. Mr. Hartwell, she said. That was my boss on the phone. He wants me to call the police.
Told you so, muttered Nate.
But I don't really want to do that, Rhoda continued. I am perfectly within my rights as a representative of the museum to view the chapel. I could just climb over the wall and it wouldn't be trespass.
Are you listening? Nate asked his father.
He looked down the road and could see some of the locals were gathering to watch with intrigue and, no doubt, amusement. But I don't really want to climb over the wall, as that would be a rather undignified way for me to gain access, and it would also be embarrassing for you. She gave a sympathetic smile. You could get us both out of an awkward predicament. Nate was impressed with her approach. Somehow, she was managing to make it sound like she was on his father's side.
What do you say, Dad?
Jack Hartwell blew out a long breath, his brow furrowing like one of his perfectly ploughed fields. Finally, he spoke.
Do you want to get off while I park this thing up?
His voice was gruff, but Nate knew his father was covering up his wounded pride. Nate jumped down from the side of the tractor and went over to Rhoda.
He's going to let you in. Thanks. Appreciate what you did there. You can tell your boss he doesn't have to get the police involved now.
I was never going to let that happen, said Rhoda. I would have been quite happy to hop over the wall, but your father deserves a bit of respect and understanding. She turned and went back to her car. Nate wasn't sure if he'd just been subtly admonished or not. He didn't know what to make of this Rhoda Sullivan woman at all. On one hand, she was kind and empathetic to his father, but on the other, starchy and disapproving towards him. He drove his car in through the gates of Telton Hall and over the bridge which straddled the stream, parking up near the front of the farmhouse. He could do with getting back to the office, but wasn't sure exactly how cooperative his father would be. Using his mobile, he rang his assistant.
Hey, Marcus. I'm going to be held up here at the farm for another hour or so, but I'll be back in time for my 2:30 appointment. Can you field any calls for me while I'm out?
Rhoda Sullivan had now pulled up next to him and didn't hesitate as she got out of her car and went over to meet Nate's father, who had parked the tractor in the far corner of the yard.
Yes, of course, replied Marcus. Anything else you need doing? No, that's all.
Nate watched as Rhoda spoke to his father.
Thanks a lot, Marcus.
Marcus was a good lad, and in the 6 months since Nate had taken on an assistant, the role had been a godsend. It freed Nate up to come out on emergency dashes like this one, and gave him more flexibility with co-parenting. Nate got out of the car, and was rather surprised to see his father smile at Rhoda. That was a quick turnaround. She was like some sort of horse whisperer, but with grumpy old farmers instead. Chapter 4. Rhoda, 2022. Rhoda took a deep breath, genuinely glad Jack Hartwell had agreed to let her into the farm. She knew her boss was on the verge of calling the police, and that was the last thing she wanted. Jack didn't deserve that sort of humiliation when all he was trying to do was hold on to his home. From the corner of her eye, she could see Jack's son heading over to them. She quickly spoke to Mr. Hartwell Sr. "Let's get up to the chapel, and I'll see what I can do." Jack nodded and gave a small smile.
"Right you are."
"I'll just get my boots on," said Rhoda. Quickly, she changed into the Wellingtons she'd brought with her and shrugged on her jacket before hooking her Singlewood Museum lanyard over her head. Glancing up, she could see Jack's son talking earnestly to his father, probably wondering what she'd said. Well, he could wonder all he liked. All she said to Jack was that when she assessed the stained glass window, it might be that she recommended the repairs took place in situ before the chapel was taken down. This, of course, would mean a delay in the sale. She'd given him a knowing look. Although it wouldn't stop the farm being sold in the long run, it would afford Jack Hartwell a little more time in his beloved home. Telton Hall was built in the same Bath stone as the boundary wall. A driveway swept around to the left, with a meadow on one side and a field on the other. Outside the house itself was a turning circle, laid to lawn, with a pond and water fountain in the centre. Telton Hall wasn't looking its finest, with the stonework grubby and the flower bed, which ran under the windows on the ground floor, looking untended. A rambling vine, possibly ivy, ran along the facework. An oak door occupied the centre of the building, with 2 sash windows each side, and repeated again on the first floor with an additional window above the front door. 2 small dormer windows rested in the roof, overlooking the grounds like beady eyes. A small terrier scampered around the corner of the house, and, with an excited yap, ran right up to Rhoda. A little taken aback at the speed the animal moved, she gave a squeal. Jack laughed out loud. "She won't hurt you. She's just happy to make a new friend. Useless as a bloody guard dog." Rhoda reached down to give the dog a stroke. It was a dear little thing. "What's her name?" "That's Tink," said Jack. "She was the runt of the litter. That's why she's so small, even for a Jack Russell. Right, shall we get up to the chapel?" He turned to his son, who was hovering in the background. "You going back to work?" No, I hadn't planned to. Thought I'd tag along." Jack gave a tut. "Suit yourself." Rhoda looked away, slightly embarrassed on Nate Hartwell's part that his father wasn't exactly bowled over at the prospect of Nate accompanying them. But if he wasn't being very supportive towards his father over the forced house move, then perhaps he deserved it. Rhoda hated the idea of any sort of bullying, whether it was outright obvious or subtle and small-scale. The sale was being imposed on Jack, who was clearly hostile to the decision, and the fact that his son didn't appear to hold the same sentiment irked her. She'd always fought for the underdog, even when it had got her in trouble when she was younger. "Glad to see you brought your boots. There's been a lot of rain this past week," said Jack, as they made their way across the yard. "The developers, Redridge Housing, are keen to get on with the groundwork. In fact, they wanted to start before the sale had been completed, but I said no." "Before you'd even moved out?" asked Rhoda. "Honestly, they are terrible." "It's not unusual," put in Nate Hartwell. "Especially in cases like this where it's a dead cert. What with it being a compulsory purchase order." "Well, I think it's wrong," retorted Rhoda, trying not to sound like a petulant child. She turned back to Jack. "How have the developers been in general? I know some of them use bully boy tactics to get their own way." "I might be an old farmer who's barely been out of Somerset, but I'm nobody's fool. Don't worry, I have the measure of them. They don't intimidate me." "I'm pleased to hear it." They walked around the farmhouse and through a gate which opened onto a footpath. The chapel was situated at the top of a small hill. "Glad it's not raining today," said Rhoda, as they waded through a particularly large puddle that stretched across the track. A few minutes later, with Tink scampering along after them, they reached the top of the hill.
I haven't been up here for a while.
Jack was puffing hard, and his cheeks were flushed.
Are you all right, Dad?
Asked Nate, coming to stand beside his father. He rested his hand lightly on Jack's back.
Don't mind me. I'll be okay in a minute,
said Jack, taking a moment to lean on the stick carved out of blackthorn he'd brought with him.
Don't be fussing now.
Rhoda exchanged a look with Nate, who gave a small shrug.
Whoever decided to build the chapel up here must have been dedicated, remarked Rhoda.
She took the opportunity to take in the view around her, of far-reaching hills and countryside against the backdrop of the Mendip Hills.
They took their religion seriously, that's for sure, replied Jack.
He appeared to have regained his breath now, much to Rhoda's relief. It was a small family chapel, not much more than the footprint of a tennis court. It was built from the local Bath stone, a sandy colour, which, like Telton Hall, was now a dirty brown after years of being exposed to the elements. Rhoda walked around the exterior of the building, coming to a halt at the large stained glass window she'd come to assess. From her viewpoint, she could see the quality of the work involved and the detail of the scene, which depicted animals boarding Noah's Ark with a white dove flying above, holding an olive branch in its beak. From her own research, Rhoda was aware the stained glass window dated back to the mid-1940s.
It's beautiful, she said softly.
Whoever did this certainly knew their craft. Her gaze travelled the length of the window from top to bottom, coming to rest on the huge crack running through the centre of the tracery arch, which, in turn, had caused another crack to make its way through several panes of glass.
The damage doesn't look too bad,
said Nate, coming to stand next to her.
Maybe not to the untrained eye, replied Rhoda.
Do you know how long it's been like this?
It's been repaired once after a storm, back in the 40s, but this latest damage is from subsidence. You think you'll be able to save the window?
Jack gave her a sideways look. Rhoda knew now was the time to deploy her perfectly honed poker face. Years of being in the care system had taught her how to hide her feelings and emotions, so no one knew what she was really thinking. Enigmatic, her foster mother had once described her. That was exactly how Rhoda liked it. Rhoda looked up at the window again and scrutinised the glass before jotting a few notes down on her iPad and taking several photographs.
I'll need to see the inside, she said.
Do you have an exact date the window was made?
Sometime between 1945 and 1947, replied Jack. End of the war.
Before your time, said Rhoda with a smile.
I wish, said Jack. No, I was a kid during the war.
I don't believe you. You're just a spring chicken, said Rhoda, enjoying the joke with the older man.
Ha! Are you flirting with me?
Rhoda couldn't help laughing. Just don't tell my boss. She looked back at the window. Do you know anything about the POW who made it?
Not much. He and his whole platoon were captured in Tripoli. They spent time in a POW camp in Egypt, then Johannesburg, before they were dispersed between America, Canada, and England. Some of the Italian POWs agreed to work on the farms. What with all the able-bodied men being away fighting, folk needed help on the land.
Do you know his name? Did he go back to Italy after the war?
Not sure about his name.
How come he made this window? Asked Rhoda, intrigued by the backstory to such a fabulous piece of craftsmanship.
The POW was some sort of glazier. It just happened to be his job back home in Italy, so he offered to fix it.
Rhoda stepped back to get a better view of the gable end of the chapel. From where she was now standing, she could see the whole west side of the building had dipped several inches, causing the crack to weave its way down the stonework. She was no architect, but from her limited knowledge, the chapel looked to be in relatively good condition. Of course, one of the big hurdles wasn't just dismantling the structure so it could be rebuilt at the museum. It was the practical issue of getting the stone down to the farm. Is there any other access up here?
Just wondering how we will transport the windows down. What about a tractor? Could you supply us with one? Jack picked up Tink and rubbed the dog's ears. I'm sure we can come to some agreement. Well, he was absolutely right when he said he was nobody's fool. Rhoda was in no doubt that payment would be needed. I'm sure we can, she replied. So, shall we have a look inside now? I haven't been in here for a long time, said Jack. Not when the developers or the museum came to survey it. I dealt with that, said Nate. Dad wasn't very well at the time. A touch of bronchitis, that's all, said Jack. When I came up, that's when we realised the building had moved, explained Nate. Prior to that, I don't think anyone's been in there for years. We used to play up here as kids, but the chapel was always locked up. I don't need to see too much, said Rhoda. Just the main window and the smaller side ones. I need to work out how long it will take to remove them. It's usually relatively straightforward, as long as the glass isn't too fragile. And if it's too fragile? Asked Nate. I will just take a bit longer, that's all. How long? Nate pressed. Dad hasn't got an indefinite amount of time left here. As long as it takes, replied Rhoda, trying and failing to keep the edge from her voice. I will have a better idea once I've been inside. Oh, there was something I've been asked to check. Was the ground consecrated, and if so, has it been deconsecrated? Yes, I had all that done as part of the sale agreement of the land, said Jack. All costs met by Redbridge, of course. Of course, replied Rhoda. Right, let's go inside, said Jack, pushing the key into the lock. Without too much resistance, the door opened. Tink was in first, nose down, sniffing all around the place. The smell of the cold and damp was the first thing Rhoda noted as she stepped across the threshold. The interior was thick with a mustiness and a stillness which made the air feel heavy. Their footsteps echoed around the stone walls and ceiling. Shafts of light shone through the windows, highlighting dust motes in the air and illuminating the inside of the building as the sun managed to cut through the layers of dirt and grime of the main stained glass window and the 3 windows on either side of the chapel. There were several rows of pews, with a central aisle leading to a stone altar. 2 tall candelabras, made from wrought iron, stood either side. Halfway along the east wall was a stone bowl on a plinth. Is that a baptism font? Rhoda asked. That's right, replied Nate. Dad was baptised there. Oh, wow. That's wonderful, said Rhoda. I was the last one to be done, said Jack. Why was that? She looked at Nate. For some reason, I was baptised down at the village church. Rhoda looked towards Jack, expecting an answer. He frowned and gave a shrug. His mother wanted it that way. Tink was whining and running back and forth from the side of the chapel to Jack. What's up with him? Asked Rhoda. Probably the mice, said Jack. With that, Tink scampered off to the side again and started scratching at the ground, stopping every now and again to bark. Come on, Tink, over here. Leave those mice alone. The little dog obviously wasn't in the mood for obeying her owner, and continued to scurry around, whining and yapping. I'll get her, said Rhoda. No, you get on with what you need to. I'll get her, said Jack, heading across the chapel towards the side. Let me, said Nate, following his father. You sit down there, Dad. Stop fussing, puffed Jack, waving Nate away with his hand. Rhoda recognised the pride in the older man's voice. He wasn't the sort to take kindly to old age catching him up, and she could see Nate was conflicted whether to respect his father's wishes or override them and help him. Rhoda took the decision away from Nate and followed them over. What's all the fuss about, Tink? She said, skirting around the Hartwells to see what the dog had found so fascinating. She took her torch from her pocket and directed the beam to the ground, ignoring the huff of annoyance from Jack. As she cast the light around the flagstone flooring, she saw that a large stone had once been repointed, and one corner had started to sink into the ground, leaving a gap. Is there an underground chamber, a crypt, or anything like that? She walked around the flagstone, keeping the torchlight focused on the hole, which was the size of a shoebox. There was a certain amount of light coming in through the windows and the open doors at the end of the chapel, but not enough to see clearly into the recesses.
"Not that I know of,"
replied Jack.
"This was just a place of worship, not burial. The family are all nicely settled in the village graveyard, and I dare say I'll be joining them in the not-too-distant future."
"Oh, don't," scolded Rhoda. "I can't see you going anywhere like that soon."
"He's far too stubborn for that,"
said Nate, with a wry smile. Rhoda shot Nate a look. "Must be a bit inconvenient for you."
"What?"
Nate glared at her. Rhoda inwardly winced, realising she'd overstepped the mark. She really ought to keep thoughts like that to herself. She knew she should apologise, but couldn't quite bring herself to do so. More excited yapping from Tink brought their attention back to the flagstone. The little dog now had her nose in the hole.
"Come on, Tink, out of there now,"
said Jack, moving towards the dog. But before he could reach her, Tink dived down through the gap.
"Tink! Tink! Come here!"
Rhoda looked on with a growing apprehension that the dog wasn't going to come back. Either that, or she couldn't. "Here, let me shine my torch in there," she said, crouching down beside Jack. "How long has the flagstone been like this?"
"Must have happened recently. Subsidence, I guess,"
replied Nate, as he crouched down beside his father.
"Dad, let me do that." No, it's okay. I can do it."
Jack's breathing was laboured as he leaned on his hands and knees. The last thing Rhoda wanted was for Jack to have some sort of medical episode up here on the hill. "Let me look," she said.
"Don't worry. The dog will be out in a minute," insisted Jack.
Rhoda wasn't so sure. Whatever had enticed the dog down there was far more exciting than being above ground. Jack got back on his feet, refusing the helping hand his son offered, opting to use his blackthorn stick as leverage, and then sat heavily down on the end of the wooden pew. Rhoda hesitated for a second as she considered the state her new trousers were about to get into. The sound of Tink whining excitedly tipped her judgment, and she got down on her hands and knees, ignoring the Hartwells' protests, and shone the torch into the hole. She couldn't see the little dog, but she was sure she wasn't that far away. She didn't fancy putting her hand in and having a feel around. She wasn't quite sure what sort of furry creature she might end up yanking out. "Any history of rats?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light.
"Ha! Rats? Who knows? I doubt it. There's nothing here for them to live on."
Jack took a hanky from his pocket and coughed into it. Rhoda had accepted she was going to have to sacrifice her whole outfit for the dog, and was now lying on her stomach to get a better view of where the canine might be. Pressing her face down on the cold flagstone to get a better view, she shone the torch right in. 2 little eyes reflected back in the torch beam. "Tink! Come on, girl!" The dog just barked at her. Remembering she had a cereal bar in her bag, Rhoda decided she'd have to resort to bribery. As she resumed her position flat on the floor and peered into the hole once again, she held out the treat. It was enough to tempt the dog towards her. Rhoda made a grab for the scruff of her neck and rather unceremoniously yanked her out of the hole.
"Ah, well done," said Jack gratefully.
"Come here, you stupid dog." It was said with much affection, and Rhoda was glad to reunite dog and owner.
"Now what was all that fuss down there for?"
asked Nate, giving the dog's head a ruffle.
"Don't be worrying about that now," said Jack,
his breathing still on the fast side.
"Come on, Dad. Let's get you outside for some fresh air," said Nate,
helping his father to his feet. Rhoda saw the hesitation in Jack's face. "I won't be long. I'll just quickly take a few notes and photos of the window and I'll be right out." She held her notebook up as reassurance and smiled before heading over to the main window. She waited until she heard the chapel door close behind Jack and Nate,
and then quickly made her way back to the flagstone. Rhoda's interest was piqued now, and seeing as her clothes were already dirty, she had nothing to lose. For the third time, she was back on the floor of the chapel. Without the dog obstructing her view, she shone the light in to see what Tink had been so fascinated with. At first, she wasn't sure what she was looking at. It looked like some rags and rubble, but as she swept the torchlight around the cavity, she realised exactly what it was. She let out a scream and rolled away from the entrance of the hole. At that moment, Nate Hartwell came back into the chapel. He hurried over to where Rhoda was now sitting up.
"Whatever's wrong? Are you okay? Did you fall?"
"I'm fine." Rhoda closed her eyes and took a deep breath.
"I need to have another look down that hole, just to make sure it is what I think it is."
She was rather more prepared this time. Nate was now on the flagstones next to her. Rhoda took one last look, just to confirm what she was seeing, before rising to a sitting position. She passed Nate the torch.
"You might want to have a look."
Nate shone the light into the hole, swore, shook his head, took another look and swore again. He, too, sat back up on his knees.
"There's a bloody skeleton down there."
10 out of 10 for observation, said Rhoda. Nate got to his feet and strode towards the door of the church.
"I need to speak to Dad."
Rhoda followed him, concerned how Jack might take the news. She caught up with Nate at the door. "Just take it easy with him, yeah?" Nate gave her what could only be described as an old-fashioned look.
"I'm not about to torture him."
Jack, who'd been perched on the edge of a buttress, pushed himself to his feet as they came out of the chapel.
"All done?"
"Not quite," said Nate. "There's something you should know."
"Maybe we should discuss this back at the house," suggested Rhoda.
"You might as well tell me now," replied Jack, his eyes darting back and forth between his son and Rhoda.
Nate nodded.
"Okay. The reason why Tink was so interested in the broken flagstones was because there's something down there, underneath them."
"Is that right?" said Jack.
Rhoda tried to read the expression on the older man's face, but it was indecipherable. She exchanged a look with Nate. "You need to tell him," she said.
"There are skeletal remains down there, Dad," said Nate. "Not a body, but human bones."
Jack made a scoffing sound.
"Bones? You sure it's not a dog or something?"
"Positive," said Rhoda. "There's a skull."
"Must have been buried there in that case," said Jack.
"But I thought you said there were no burials here," persisted Rhoda. Jack gave a huff.
"I must have got it wrong."
"It doesn't look like it's been buried there," continued Rhoda. "I'm not an expert, but I didn't see any sign of a coffin."
"You don't remember anyone ever mentioning it before?"
asked Nate.
"Could there be others?"
"No, I don't remember," said Jack,
his agitation showing in his voice. "We'll need to let the police know," said Rhoda gently. "Let's go back to the house. It's a shock for everyone. We should have a cup of tea." She looked at Nate, who nodded in agreement.
"Good idea,"
he said.
"The police," muttered Jack. "That's all we need."
Chapter 5. Alice, 1945. Alice pulled out the suitcase from the back of her wardrobe and placed it on her bed. She felt surprisingly nervous as she slid the locks to one side, releasing the clasps. Was nervous the right word? Apprehension, maybe? She wasn't sure, but the thought of wearing one of her mother's dresses that night filled her with trepidation. She took a deep breath and lifted the lid of the brown leather suitcase. She took another breath as a faint smell of her mother's perfume was released into the room. Alice carefully lifted the dresses out and laid them out on the bed, discarding the case on the floor so there was enough room to see the beautiful fabrics in all their glory. Her mother, Emily Louise Renshaw, née Bryce Baker, prior to meeting and marrying Alice's father, had been a seamstress in London. She had often been allowed to take home pieces from sample collections for some of the wealthier clients. Alice remembered Emily coming home with evening gowns, which she had nowhere to wear, but she would let her daughter dress up in them. Sometimes Emily would cut them up and recreate a smaller version for Alice to wear and indulge in make-believe games of cocktail parties and gala dinners. Oh, how she missed her mother. Alice picked up the white trouser suit Emily had proudly worn to a wedding, a cropped jacket with puffed three-quarter-length sleeves and trousers that were high-waisted and wide-legged. Emily had worn a multicoloured blouse underneath with a flouncy necktie. Alice remembered her father staring in disbelief as her mother had come down the stairs. She had taken his breath away. He had made a deep bow before kissing her hand. It was hard to believe he was the same man who was now sitting at the kitchen table. Alice felt a wave of sadness wash over her that caused her heart to ache and tears to spring to her eyes. Beautiful as it was, the trouser suit wasn't the right thing to wear to the dance with Brett. Alice looked at the 3 other outfits. One was a long pale blue evening gown with hand-sewn sequins and embroidered flowers. It had a low-cut back, and although undeniably stunning, it was probably too grand to wear to the American base. That left the floral A-line dress with capped sleeves, or the closely fitted emerald green cocktail dress of silk and lace. Alice tried on both. Goodness, her mother had been slim. The cocktail dress was beautiful, but too tight. Alice had to force the zip, and was sure she wouldn't be able to sit down in it. What a shame. She could have really wowed Brett in that. Fortunately, the floral A-line dress was rather more forgiving and fitted well, showing off her curvy figure. She wasn't quite sure how she'd managed to put on weight, seeing as she ate like a sparrow due to the rationing, but she filled the dress nicely and hoped Brett would appreciate her fuller-looking bust. Once she'd done her makeup and hair, Alice gave herself one final inspection in the full-length mirror and was very pleased with what she saw. She checked her watch. She was meeting Jess at the end of the road in 5 minutes, and then they were going to meet Brett and Howard at the church. Brett had, on more than one occasion, offered to meet Alice at her home, but she'd always declined. She wasn't sure her father would be very welcoming, and she could do without any trouble between the 2 men. "I'm off now, Dad," she called from the hallway, slipping her arms into her coat and tying the belt around her.
"What time will you be back?"
Her father appeared in the doorway of the sitting room. "Not sure. There's a dance at the mess. I'll be with Jess." She gave him a quick smile and went to open the front door.
"Wait."
Alice paused, her hand on the lock. "What?"
"Turn around."
"I'll be late, Dad."
"What are you wearing?"
Alice swallowed. "Just a dress." She tried to sound casual and turned to meet her father's gaze. There was a mix of anger and pain in his eyes.
"Who said you could wear that?"
"No one said I couldn't," Alice replied evenly. "Besides, Mum would be pleased to know I was wearing it."
"Put something else on."
His voice was harsh. "I haven't got anything else, and I'm going to be late." Alice reached for the lock again.
"Do as you're told,"
her father snapped. "Dad, I'm 18 years old. I'm an adult. I can wear this dress if I want."
"Don't argue with me. If you're that much of an adult, what are you still doing living under my roof?"
"Living under your roof, but paying my way," retorted Alice. "Cooking and cleaning for you, doing the shopping, doing the washing. It's not exactly for free, is it?" She didn't know who was more surprised by her outburst. Alice didn't usually flare up so easily at her father, but she hadn't been able to stop herself.
"Don't you be so bloody cheeky, young lady."
Her father raised his voice. "I'm wearing this dress, and I'm going out." With that, Alice was out of the door, slamming it behind her before her father could say another word. She marched down the path and out into the street, her anger pushing her on as her heels struck the pavement. She could see Jess waiting at the end, and by the time she reached her, the anger had morphed into hot tears. "Alice, whatever's the matter?" cried Jess, giving her friend a hug.
I'm fine, honest,
said Alice, fishing her hanky from her bag. She dabbed at her eyes.
I'm going to end up looking like a panda.
Here, you've missed a bit, said Jess, taking the hanky from her and wiping under her left eyelid.
What happened? Argument with your dad? Yes. He got all funny about me wearing Mum's dress and wanted me to change. Then he started on about living under his roof and all that usual stuff.
Alice sighed.
I just couldn't help myself and told him I could do what I like. You're brave.
Jess handed her back the handkerchief.
Stupid, more like. And I don't even know why I'm crying. I'm angry, really.
Come on, you don't want Brett to see you all red-eyed and blotchy. Forget about your dad. It will blow over, like it usually does. Alice suddenly felt weary and really wasn't in the mood for going out now. Not even the thought of seeing Brett was lifting her spirits. What was wrong with her? She needed to forget about her dad and concentrate on having a nice evening. Despite still feeling unusually emotional, Alice forced a smile and fell into step alongside Jess. Jess linked arms with her. That's better. Their heels click-clacked down the street. Oh, did you hear about Betsy Granger?
No, what's that?
Alice remembered Betsy from school. She had been a couple of years above her and Jess. Studious type of girl, if she remembered rightly. She's only gone and got herself pregnant. Alice stopped walking and turned to Jess. I don't think girls go and get themselves pregnant. I'm pretty sure there's a bloke involved in it too. Jess laughed. Oh, Alice, you are funny. Anyway, what do you reckon to that? She's probably one of the last people to get caught out, said Alice, as they began walking again. Who's the father? Some lad from town. She's been seeing him for about a year. They turned the corner into the high street. Shotgun wedding coming up. What a silly cow, though, to let that happen. She's over 3 months pregnant, apparently, so the wedding is going to be as soon as possible. My mum was talking to her aunt yesterday, and she said... Jess's voice trailed off as Alice's mind began to churn her own dates over. When did she last have her period? She did the mental calculations. 6 weeks ago? Or was it 7? She swallowed as her throat dried. 7 weeks, maybe even 8. She couldn't get her brain to work properly. It was the day after Brett's birthday, that's right, back in February. She gulped again. 8 weeks. Was that right? Definitely right. Her hand went to her stomach, and she thought of the tight waistband of the dress, the fit of the fabric across her bust, her bigger-than-usual bust. And there was the tiredness, the extreme emotions. She hadn't been sick, but she knew well enough not every woman suffered with morning sickness. Oh, bloody hell. She felt lightheaded and had to hold tighter onto Jess's arm. Jess, she whispered. She was still trying to process it all, but there was no denying it. Jess, I don't know where they're going to live, Jess was saying, still talking about Betsy Granger. Probably with her mum. They've got enough room at their house. Jess, it's not like she hasn't got the room. Jess, I think I'm pregnant. What's that? Jess clearly hadn't heard Alice. I said, I think I'm pregnant. The words sounded foreign on her lips. How could she even be saying this? They'd taken precautions. They hadn't even done it that many times, and yet... Pregnant? Jess's voice was high-pitched. You're bloody joking! Please tell me you're joking! Alice turned and looked at her friend. She shook her head. Not joking. Oh my God, Alice! Are you sure? As sure as I can be. 8 weeks late, thicker waistline, bigger bust, tired, irritable, emotional. Sick? No, but that doesn't mean anything. True. Jess looked long and hard at her. What are you going to do? Your dad will kill you, and then kill Brett. I know. Have you told Brett? Not yet. I've only just realised myself. They stood in a stunned silence for a moment, before Jess spoke. You know, there are options. Alice looked at her friend, taking a moment to understand what Jess was saying.
She shook her head. I don't think I can do that. Get rid of it. She contemplated the idea some more. No, I can't. I couldn't do that. In that case, you need to tell Brett, said Jess. You're going to start showing, and if he does want to marry you, you'll need to get that sorted. She let out a long sigh. Bloody hell, there's me prattling on about Betsy Granger and you're... She waved her hand in the direction of Alice's belly. You're going to have a baby, finished Alice, holding her chin high. They walked on in silence down the road, the church coming into view as they rounded the bend. Tell him tonight, Alice, said Jess. You've got to tell him straight away, so you know what you're going to do. I will, replied Alice, breaking into a smile as Brett stepped out from the shadow of the lich gate. Don't say anything to anyone until I've spoken to him. Promise? Promise. Hey there, beautiful, said Brett as they reached him. He took Alice in his arms and kissed her. Alice relaxed at the warmth of his embrace. She was nervous as anything. There were no two ways about it. But his kiss was reassuring and gave her confidence. They would be all right. This is the end of CD 1. The book continues on CD 2. CD 2. You're what? Brett looked at Alice, horror and disbelief all over his face. This was not how Alice had imagined the conversation was going to go. They were outside the mess hall, taking the opportunity to have some time alone. In reality, that meant making out in the now darkened grounds of the base, the trees and bushes surrounding the recreation area giving them privacy. Brett was now pacing back and forth between a hydrangea bush and a laurel hedge, his hand running agitatedly through his thick brown hair. How? Alice raised her eyebrows. That's a stupid question. You know what I mean, he snapped. How? We used a rubber. Well, I hate to be the one to break the news to you, but they don't always work. Alice could feel the fear rising in her, which she was channeling as anger. She'd known he'd be surprised, but not hostile. And it's mine? Damn it, I didn't mean that. Now the anger was real and pure. How dare you? Alice demanded, striding over to him, the urge to slap him hard across the face, only just contained. I'm sorry, bleated Brett. I don't know why I said that. I am just shocked. Shit, I'm only 21. I'm only 18. What are we going to do? Alice gave a shrug. What do you want to do? Much as she'd had a rosy image of Brett dropping to one knee and proposing to her, she wasn't naive enough to think it was going to happen. Not after his reaction, anyway. Her mind was racing ahead. Maybe he wasn't going to ask her at all. Then she would be in a predicament. I don't know. I need time to think about it. Well, that's a luxury we don't have. Brett ran his hand down his face, and then stood with his hands on his hips, staring down at the ground. After a few moments, he seemed to have come to a decision. He looked up, took a breath, and strode over to her. It will be okay. I can speak to my sergeant. He'll know someone who can help. I'm not the first one to be in this situation. I'll pay for it, of course. It will be done properly. Wait, stop right there, said Alice, stepping back. I'm not getting an abortion, if that's what you're thinking. No way, absolutely not. You want to keep it? Brett looked startled by this revelation. You want to saddle us with a kid? I wasn't thinking saddling was the right word, but yes, I want to keep it. She looked him dead in the eye. I thought you loved me. Whoa there. I don't think I said anything about love. Alice wanted to cry. His words were like a knife twisting in her heart. If she was honest, he'd never mentioned love. Sure, she'd told him she loved him, but now she thought about it, he'd never told her. I just need to know if you're going to stand by me, she said.
trying to keep control of the tremble that had taken hold of her voice. There was a heavy silence. Despite being out in the fresh April air, Alice was suddenly struggling for breath. It was like a hot summer's day when a storm was brewing. Heavy, sticky, close, muggy.
"I'm in the Air Force," said Brett. "We're in the middle of a goddamn war. I'm in a foreign country. I need time to think this through. It's not just how it affects us, it's how it affects everything else. My career, my family, your family, our future. Just give me a couple of days when I'm not trying to think through several beers and the shock of it all."
"All right, that's fair enough." Alice didn't have a lot of choice. "You need to let me know by Wednesday. It's my half day. We'll meet at the bridge, 1 o'clock.
"Yeah, sure."
"I'm going home now."
"Wait, I'll walk you."
"No, you don't have to." She wasn't sure she could bear the closeness of him, knowing he was having to think about whether he could commit to her and his baby, their baby.
"I insist. I'm not that much of a schmuck that I'll leave you to walk home alone."
He caught her hand.
"Thank you,"
he said softly. Alice looked at him, not knowing how to reply. "Can you get my coat?" she said, slipping her hand from his and looking in her clutch purse for her cloakroom ticket. She passed it over to him. "Will you tell Jess and make sure Howard walks her home?"
"Yeah, sure."
Brett seemed to take ages before he reappeared with Alice's coat. "I thought you'd abandoned me already," said Alice, trying to make a joke, but judging by the look on Brett's face, failing miserably. He held her coat up for her, and she slipped her arms in. With her back to him, it was then she felt his lips kiss the back of her neck.
"Alice,"
he said softly, turning her around to look at him.
"I'm sorry about how I reacted. I promise I won't let you down."
As they walked home together, Alice felt such relief. She wasn't quite sure what Brett meant by that. He hadn't proposed to her, but she could only assume he would do so in better circumstances. Maybe he wanted to speak to her father or buy her a ring first. She didn't know, but as she kissed him goodnight, she felt a happiness she hadn't experienced all night. And as she walked up the path to her house, there was a relief, too. Soon, she wouldn't have to live under the same roof as her father. 14th of July, 1944.
Carissime Mamma e Sofia, dearest Mother and Sophia, I hope you are both well. Thank you for your letter, which I received last week. It was good to hear from you. The post has been slow, and I received your second letter at the same time, so it was doubly nice for me that day. I hope this letter doesn't take so long to get to you, though. I am now in a prison camp in South Africa. Who would have thought I'd end up seeing so much of the world as a prisoner? I'm in a prison hospital while my leg heals. The doctor is hopeful of a full recovery, but I shall be in plaster for many weeks. It comes right up to the top of my leg. It is hot and itchy, but still I am alive, and that is the important thing. What good news your letter brought, though, that Sophia, you are now a mother and your baby arrived safely last month. I have been thinking about you and wondering if I was now an uncle. I may only be 18, but I will be such a good uncle to little Luca, and I can't wait to hold him in my arms. I will very much look forward to taking him to the park, teaching him to climb trees and fish in the lake near our house, just like Father used to take me. Have you heard from Franco? I expect he will be delighted to learn of the safe arrival of his son. We shall have such a party to celebrate when we are together again. I am glad you are in the country and away from the big towns and cities, so you are safe from the bombing raids I have been hearing about. We are not officially told much, but word from home has spread among the men, and it is an anxious time for us all, as we think of our families and loved ones. Take care of each other. Il vostro amorevole figlio e fratello. Your loving son and brother, Paolo.
Chapter 6. Nate, 2022.
I'm no expert, but I think it's fair to say those are human remains, said Detective Sergeant Shepherd as he exited the chapel.
Under instruction from the DS, Nate was waiting outside the chapel with both his father and Rhoda Sullivan. Nate had tried to persuade his father to wait back at the farmhouse, but he was being particularly stubborn about it. That, of course, wasn't anything new. Rhoda Sullivan had been asked to wait by Shepherd, as he would need to question her. Rhoda was on the phone to someone. Nate assumed it was her boss, giving the museum an update. She ended the call when she saw the DS come out and made her way over.
And you're the one who found the body? Shepherd asked her.
If you mean was I the first to see it, then yes. Technically, the dog found it, she replied. Are you likely to need me to stay to give a statement? Only I've got quite a long drive back to Sussex.
I can take an initial statement, replied Shepherd. I'd like forensics to have a look first.
He turned to Jack.
Is there a crypt or a burial chamber?
Nate's father shrugged.
Not that I know of. I suppose there could be. Are there any historical records for the chapel? Something that might tell us if anyone's been buried here, or any records of work being done here? Might give us some clue when the floor was last dug up. The body must have been buried at that time or after. Not that I know of.
Jack gave the same answer as before. Nate flicked his father a look. He was being particularly obtuse.
Isn't there a family Bible with all the births, marriages and deaths listed inside the cover? And what about the farm ledgers?
He turned to Shepherd.
My grandmother kept meticulous records of all the income and expenses relating to the farm, including maintenance work.
His father frowned at him.
I've no idea where that Bible is, and as for the ledgers, they're all packed away somewhere.
Nate let out a sigh and gave the DS an apologetic look.
If there is something like a Bible with all the names, it might prove very useful, said Shepherd. Perhaps you could have a look round. Is it likely to be in the chapel?
No, nothing like that in there, said Nate.
It will be in the house, if anywhere. I'll have a look for you. Thank you, Mr. Hartwell.
Shepherd's phone buzzed, and he looked at the screen.
Ah, that's good. Forensics have just pulled up.
He took out his pocketbook and made a note of something.
How long has the crack in the flagstones been there?
Hard to say, replied Jack.
No one comes up here regularly.
It could be from the subsidence, said Rhoda.
Are you an architect?
Asked Shepherd. No, that's way above my pay grade. I specialise in glasswork, restoration in particular. But the subsidence is indirectly why I'm here, explained Rhoda. I've come up here to assess the damage to the stained glass window. The damage has been caused by movement in the building. It's on the same side as the building is pitching. It seems the logical explanation. Shepherd looked back through the open chapel door.
It's a big window. Impressive. You're going to restore that?
Yes, I am. Nate picked up on the tone in Rhoda's voice, as if she was challenging Shepherd to think otherwise.
You sound very confident.
Shepherd gave her a sceptical look. It won't be the first one I've done, Rhoda said tersely. Shepherd nodded.
I see. What's so special about this one? It was made by an Italian prisoner of war, interjected Nate. He worked on the farm from 1944 to 1946. He was still here after the war, queried Shepherd.
Took a bit of time for them all to be repatriated, said Rhoda. They didn't all just pack their bags on the 8th of May, 1945, and wave goodbye as they caught the bus to the train station. Nate managed to choke down the burst of laughter that tried to escape his throat. Rhoda Sullivan wasn't one for holding back, and with no apologies for her outspokenness. Shepherd's face reddened a little.
Well, no, of course.
He looked down at his notebook and cleared his throat.
There is some pointing around the flagstones which looks a different colour to the others, more recent. Do you know anything about that, Mr. Hartwell?
He looked at both Nate and his father.
Not that I know of, replied Jack. If there's any record of any work being carried out on the building, I'd like to see that, said Shepherd. My mother ran this farm up until I took over in the 60s, supplied Jack. I would have been just a nipper, so I can't help you there. We'd have to look through the farm records. That's if it's even recorded. And is your mother still around to talk to?
She's in the village, said Jack. And before Nate could say anything, he quickly added,
In the graveyard.
Ah, I see. She's passed away. Jack gave a snort.
You're quick to catch on. No wonder you're a detective sergeant.
Nate gave a sigh and caught Rhoda's eye. She looked away, clearly trying to smother a smile. His father was a cantankerous old sod at times.
And has any work been done here since then, in your time?
The DS continued, either oblivious to Jack's comment or choosing to ignore it.
A bit of maintenance, but not in recent years.
Jack looked uninterested.
Maybe someone did redo the flagstones at some point. Is there anyone in your family I could talk to who would know a bit more about what happened here during the war?
Nope, said Jack, at the same time that Nate said,
Yes.
The DS looked confused.
There is, or there isn't.
There's Aunt Aggie, said Nate.
She's Dad's cousin. She lives across the road in Telton Cottage. She would have been about— She won't know anything, cut in Jack. I will probably need to speak to your cousin, said Shepherd, just to make sure I've covered all bases. Routine, as they say.
At that point, the forensic team arrived, and after a bit of persuasion, Nate managed to convince his father to wait in the house while the police did what they needed to.
Is all this going to hold up the sale?
Asked Jack as they went down the hill.
Depends on what they find, said Nate.
Also depends on when I can repair the window, put in Rhoda. From my initial inspection, I'm going to recommend the repair work is carried out before anything else.
The council and the developers won't be very happy about that, said Nate.
He saw Rhoda wink at his father. Oh well, she said. They'll just have to wait, won't they? They were outside the house now.
You're going to come in for a cup of tea, aren't you? Asked Jack.
I won't intrude, said Rhoda. I need to write up my report, which I can do in my car. Save me having to do it when I get home tonight.
Are you sure? Asked Nate. At least let me bring you out a cup of tea.
I'm absolutely fine, but thank you.
Don't be daft, said Jack. You can sit in the dining room and work there.
Rhoda went to apologise, but realised it would be futile and agreed to Jack's request. The trio trooped inside. Nate showed her into the dining room.
Sorry about this.
About what?
Being forced to come into the house. Seems Dad has taken a shine to you.
It's mutual.
Nate gave a smile. Not sure how you did it. One minute he's blocking you from coming in, the next he's got you sitting in the dining room to do your work.
Rhoda looked around the room, her gaze coming to rest on the bank of photographs displayed on the sideboard. Your father has a lot of memories here.
Yes, lived here all his life.
Must be frightening for him, having to move at his age.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. We've done everything we can to oppose the CPO, but they've rejected every suggestion, explained Nate. We asked to keep the house and allow all the development to go on around it, but they said no to that. We even suggested Dad gets one of the apartments, but they're just not interested.
Bastards. They don't take the individual's feelings into account. They just ride roughshod over people. I hate the system. Nate could see the resentment on her face, but when she saw him watching, she quickly shifted it to a more neutral expression.
Anyway, I'd better get this report done. Yes, of course. I'll make a cup of tea. I'd better also warn my aunt about the police wanting to talk to her. Not that I think she'll be any more help than Dad was. She knows even less.
Nate left the room and went out into the hall. He poked his head into the living room. His father had nodded off in the armchair by the fireside. Nate crept in, took the blanket from the back of the chair, and placed it over his father's lap. After making Rhoda a drink, he popped over to Telton Cottage to see Aggie. Nate let himself into the cottage through the back door, which Aggie always kept unlocked, despite his efforts to persuade her otherwise. He called out to her so as not to startle her, and went into the living room.
Seems rather a to-do going on over there, said his aunt. Yeah, you could say that.
Nate went and stood at the window, where he could see down the driveway of Telton Hall on the opposite side of the road.
"Now, don't be alarmed," he began.
And quickly, with minimal detail, he told his aunt about the skeleton in the chapel.
"A skeleton? Human remains?" she repeated.
"That's right. Forensics are up there now. I expect they're trying to get an idea of how long it's been there."
He paused as he waited for his aunt to take in the information.
"You don't know if anyone has ever been buried up there, do you?"
His aunt looked quite pale.
"No, at least I don't think so. If there was, it must be from when it was first built."
"I've asked Dad, but he doesn't know either, and he didn't think there was any underground crypt or anything. Do you remember Gran ever saying anything about it?"
His aunt shook her head.
"No. Goodness, this is a shock."
"The police said they will need to speak to you. Don't worry, it's just a formality,"
reassured Nate, wondering if there was any way he could persuade the DS not to come over. His aunt looked particularly upset by the news.
"You don't know anything, so it won't take long. I'll be here when they come, though."
"Thank you, dear,"
replied Aggie. She gave a shudder.
"Oh, what horrible business."
"They're keen to know if any building works have been carried out at the chapel. Do you remember anything?"
His aunt shook her head.
No, I don't. To be honest, I've never liked that place. Used to give me goosebumps. I've not been up there since I was a child. I hope the police aren't going to question me too much."
"Don't worry, it's just routine."
The clock on the mantelpiece chimed the hour. Nate double-checked his watch.
"Oh, I'd better go. I didn't realise that was the time. Got to pick Isaac up from school."
"Okie dokie, dear. See you later."
Nate nipped back across the road and up the drive to Telton Hall to explain to his father and Rhoda that he would be back in just under an hour.
"He lives with his mum, but we co-parent,"
Nate found himself explaining to their guest. Rhoda raised her eyebrows. "Lucky boy." Nate assessed her for a minute, unsure how to read her comment.
"Yeah, well, I like to think I'm the lucky one,"
he found himself saying.
"Me and his mum get on reasonably well. There's never been any animosity between us."
He stopped himself from talking, unsure why he felt the need to explain his and his ex's personal arrangements with a stranger. Rhoda smiled. "Lucky you as well, then." She turned her attention back to her screen, and feeling as if he had been dismissed, Nate left the room. The thought that Rhoda disapproved of him, for whatever reason, niggled him. He wanted to shrug off the thought, but as he drove away from Telton Hall, he found himself stewing about it. He couldn't work out why he got that vibe from her, or what he'd done to deserve it. Chapter 7. Rhoda, 2022. Rhoda stood at the dining room window, watching Nate Hartwell's car disappear out of the drive. She'd been a bit harsh with him, she knew that, and she was annoyed with herself for it. After all, what happened in the Hartwell family was none of her business. She couldn't make up her mind if he was on his dad's side or not. She also couldn't make up her mind why it bothered her. She returned to her report, rather than ponder the complexities of the Hartwell family. An hour later, Rhoda had just finished her second cup of tea and was debating whether she should go up to the guy from CID and ask how long she would need to wait, when she heard a car pull up outside. From her position, she could see it was Nate Hartwell, together with his young son. The timing couldn't have been better, as DS Shepherd came into her line of sight. The two men exchanged a few words, and then came into the house. Rhoda saved her document and went out to the hallway to meet them. Nate's son had already disappeared into the living room, and she could hear him talking to his grandfather.
"Sorry to keep you," said Shepherd. "I've got an initial assessment from forensics that I need to discuss with you all." "Of course," said Nate. "Please, this way." He opened the living room door, and Rhoda followed on behind the DS. "Hey, Isaac, why don't you come with me to the kitchen? I'll sort you out something to eat and drink. You can watch something on the tablet if you want. He coaxed his son out of the room. Won't be a moment.
Nate was back within a few minutes and sat in the armchair on the other side of the fireplace to his father. Rhoda had already seated herself on the sofa, while D.S. Shepherd remained standing. She had to withhold a smile at the thought they looked as if they were on the set of an Agatha Christie mystery, and the policeman was just about to reveal the name of the killer. They only needed a gardener, a maid, and an eccentric aunt to complete the cast.
Are you okay, Miss Sullivan?
It was Shepherd. Rhoda looked up, startled to realise Shepherd and the Hartwells were looking at her.
Sorry, was a bit distracted. She sat forward on the sofa to signal he had her full attention, and pushed any thoughts of Christie from her mind.
So, forensics have been able to establish a few things, began Shepherd. Obviously, this all needs confirming back at the lab, but from what they can tell, the remains are those of a young adult male, judging by the bones.
Rhoda felt her stomach instantly turn at the description, although she knew it was irrational to associate this unnamed body with her disappeared brother.
How long has he been there? She asked.
That would be the simplest way to rule out whether it was Dean. She hated the way she thought in terms of finding his body rather than him. When had that started to happen? She blinked away the thought, concentrating on Shepherd's answer.
Can't say at this point. Bone can survive in good condition for a long time, depending on the soil.
Shepherd paused for a moment before continuing.
Have you any idea who this might be? Was there a family member or a farm worker possibly who went missing? Did your family ever talk about a missing person when you were a boy?
He looked at Jack. Jack gave a perplexed look.
I can't remember anyone ever talking about a man going missing.
But if it was foul play, then they probably wouldn't, Rhoda piped up. Was it suspicious circumstances? Because I guess if the body was hidden, never meant to be found, then the chances are it wasn't a natural death. Shepherd raised his eyebrows.
I'm supposed to be the detective around here.
So was it natural causes? Or can't you tell?
At this early stage, it looks like the victim was struck on the head with a blunt instrument, and that was the cause of death.
Could he have tripped and hit his head on something? Asked Nate.
Apparently, with a fall, they would expect to see a different pattern of injury, like a fracture spreading out. But the injury was caused by an object of about 2 centimetres in diameter.
Like a hammer? Asked Nate.
Yes, like a hammer.
Rhoda appreciated the tact the DS was using, gradually revealing the evidence that was clearly pointing towards murder. So we can say murder, she said.
Unofficially,
confirmed Shepherd. People don't usually go around doing that to themselves, or by accident, replied Rhoda.
No, not in my experience,
replied Shepherd. Rhoda couldn't make out if he was annoyed or amused at her. Either one wasn't appealing. So, a murder investigation?
Possibly.
Shepherd pulled out a clear plastic bag from his pocket and held it out to Jack.
Do you recognise this at all?
Rhoda watched as Jack peered closely at the bag.
No. What is it? A ring? Yes, probably a homemade one, as it doesn't join up. You'd just squeeze this to fit.
May I? Asked Rhoda, intrigued at the find. Shepherd passed her the bag. I'm not an expert, but I've come across these things before. It looks like it's made out of an old coin, possibly bronze. If that's the case, then it's from the late 1800s onwards. I don't know if you'll be able to get any detail from it once it's cleaned up, like a date or something, but you might be able to see if it's an English coin or a foreign one.
What makes you think it might be foreign?
Asked Shepherd. There was genuine interest in his voice. It was only a suggestion, said Rhoda. But I'm here to look at a stained glass window that was made by a prisoner of war at the end of the war. What's to say it's not an Italian coin?
No, it wouldn't be that, said Jack. The POWs wouldn't have had their own currency on them. They got paid, all right, but they were paid with cigarettes or tokens to use in the camps. They had a mobile shop that came around where they could buy things with their tokens.
A lucky coin, perhaps? Suggested Rhoda.
Only not so lucky if it belongs to a skeleton.
Shepherd gave a laugh, which no one joined in with. Clearly realising the bad taste of the joke, he tried to turn it into a cough.
An Italian POW wouldn't have need for an English coin either, said Jack. Was the ring on the body?
No, alongside, replied Shepherd. Every effort to regain his position of authority oozed from him as he adjusted his tie and stood a little taller.
So it might not even belong to the body, said Jack. True, but it might belong to whoever buried the body.
Say you find the date, said Rhoda. Unless it's recent, it's not really going to reveal very much.
That's for me to worry about, said Shepherd.
How long do you think the body has been there for? Asked Nate.
Could be as far back as the war, replied Shepherd. Forensics might be able to give a more precise date once they've got the bones back at the lab.
And you'd investigate an 80-year-old crime? Asked Jack.
There's no statute of limitations on murder, replied Shepherd. Having said that, we'd have to weigh up the chances of finding out what happened, the perpetrator still being alive, or indeed anyone being alive, and the costs and resources involved.
Rhoda felt her blood pump a little harder through her veins at his reply. You're saying you wouldn't investigate it?
Not if it wasn't in the interest of the public.
But that's someone's son up there, protested Rhoda. Someone out there might still be wondering what happened to their loved one.
Son, said Shepherd. The parents are most likely dead.
Or brother, or he might be someone's father. Rhoda rose from her seat, so she was facing the DS. You can't just ignore the fact that there is quite possibly someone directly related to that man, and he was a man. Just because it's a skeleton now, you can't lose sight of the fact that he was a man. He had a life that was taken away from him, and the chances are no one knows and has spent all these years wondering what happened to him. You have the opportunity to help put someone out of their misery. She stopped as the words choked in her throat. She hadn't meant to say all that, but she hadn't been able to stop herself. It was all too raw and close to home. Rhoda managed to compose herself and sat back down, aware that all eyes in the room were fixed firmly on her. Nate's gaze seemed to penetrate the most, and Rhoda knew she'd perhaps given too much of herself away.
There may be no statute of limitations on murder, replied Shepherd, but there is a limitation to the effectiveness of investigating a crime which could be 80 or even 100 years old.
But surely you can't do that. Surely you owe it to the person who has been murdered to at least try to bring their killer to justice. Rhoda really couldn't believe what she was hearing, but her tone was much more under control now. She looked to Jack. Don't you want to know who has been killed and buried on your property? Jack looked decidedly uncomfortable.
Of course. But like the sergeant said, it's hard to find anything out when there are probably no witnesses still alive.
Is this likely to hold up the sale? Asked Nate. The turn of question seemed to throw everyone off for a moment. Shepherd recovered first.
We will try to deal with this as quickly as possible. It all depends on what we find out and whether we open a murder investigation. I'm sorry I can't tell you anything more at this point.
Nate frowned.
We could do without this, to be honest.
Rhoda couldn't bite her tongue. I'm sure the family of the murder victim will be pleased to hear that.
Okay, I think we're probably done here for today.
Shepherd looked at Rhoda.
If I can take some contact details, I can let you get on your way. You've got a bit of a drive ahead of you.
Rhoda dug out a business card from her bag and handed it to Shepherd. All my details are on there. She got up from the sofa and hooked her bag over her arm. Please, don't just dismiss the investigation. It's important that any family of the victim has closure. Her heart tightened, and she found herself having to take several deep, steadying breaths as she picked up her jacket and the rucksack she used for work. I'll be in touch again soon, Jack, she said, finding her voice and feeling grateful it was under control. Goodbye, Nate. Nice to meet you. Sergeant.
Safe journey,
replied Shepherd.
You'll get caught in all the rush hour traffic, said Nate.
Rhoda looked at her watch and was surprised to see it was almost 4:30. What's the local pub like for food?
Nothing fancy, I'm afraid, said Nate. You'll probably find something more refined in town.
Good old pub grub is fine by me. Right, I'll be off. She smiled at Jack. I'll keep you in the loop with what's happening with the window. Obviously, I can't do anything until the police have finished with the chapel. Call me if you need to talk about anything. Jack returned the smile.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Getting into her car, Rhoda was quite happy to leave Telton Hall. Her earlier feelings of admiration for the property had morphed into one of apprehension and disquiet. There was something about it she didn't like. She hadn't felt it when she'd first arrived that morning, but the discovery of the body, and trying to persuade Shepherd that he should investigate the death, however old the case might be, had triggered all sorts of deep-rooted emotions. She felt the anxious churning in her stomach as she thought of her own circumstances. The years of being taken into care, the fear of the unknown and of the known, but most of all, being separated from her brother, and the subsequent events which had unfolded. Rhoda closed her eyes for a moment as the familiar but unwelcome bubble of distress rolled around inside her, churning her stomach and squeezing her heart. From the inside pocket of her bag, she slipped out an old photograph, faded with age and crumpled with use. The smiling face of her then 18-year-old twin brother looked back at her. She ran her finger over the image, a gesture she did most times she looked at Dean, and asked the same question. "Where are you, Dino? I'm still looking for you. Please come home." From the corner of her eye, she noticed Nate coming out of the house and walking over towards her. She fumbled to get the key in the ignition so she could buzz down the window, and only just managed to as he reached her.
Sorry, this may sound weird, but are you okay? You seemed a bit upset in there.
Did I? Rhoda started the engine. I just like to see fair play, that's all.
Fighting for the underdog, eh?
Something like that. Nate rested his hand on the roof and dipped his head so it was level with hers. She saw his gaze travel to the passenger seat and the photograph she had discarded in her fluster to get the key in the ignition. She snatched up the photograph, wanting to shove it into her bag out of the way, but something made her stop. A knot of agitation fought its way up to her throat, and her reply came out as a strangled noise. She coughed. "It's my brother, Dean. He went missing just before our 18th birthday.
I'm sorry. That must be tough."
Rhoda nodded. "We have no idea what happened to him. You're right, it is tough. Some days are very tough. He's my twin brother."
"I'm sorry,"
Nate repeated.
"That must be especially difficult."
Rhoda shrugged. "I guess so. Look, we are twins, but we didn't have any of that twin telepathy going on. We hadn't even lived under the same roof since we were 12, but, he's still my brother."
"Of course. I don't have any siblings."
"Only child?"
"That's the definition of having no siblings."
He gave a laugh, and somehow Rhoda sensed he was having a bit of sport with her. She couldn't help a small smile escaping. "I deserved that." She put her car into reverse. Nate didn't move away.
"Actually, Dad asked me to invite you in for fish and chips. He said we shouldn't subject you to Harry's pub grub, and I'm inclined to agree."
"Oh, that's really kind," said Rhoda, preparing herself to politely decline, a reflex action that was her modus operandi as she shied away from spontaneous decisions with people she didn't know. Okay, make that trust. But for some reason, she found herself hesitating. Despite the cold and insidious atmosphere of Telton Hall, there was also an unrelenting draw to the place. She wanted to find out more about the remains of the man in the chapel. It was such a strong desire, she found herself agreeing. "I don't want to intrude, but I must admit I don't think I can turn down the offer of fish and chips."
"Excellent. It will stop me getting earache from Dad about not making you stay for supper."
Rhoda switched off the engine and got out. As she walked back up towards Telton Hall, something made her look up to the first floor of the building. The shadows cast across the individual window panes of the sash meant she couldn't see clearly, but she was sure someone was standing at the window at the end, looking down at them. The sun chose that moment to pop out from behind a cloud, causing her to squint.
"Ah, you're staying for supper. That's good."
Jack was standing in the doorway. Couldn't refuse such an offer. Rhoda gave another glance up to the window, her eyes now adjusted to the evening sun. The window was empty. It must have been Nate's son, Isaac. Stepping into the house again, Rhoda gave a shudder as goosebumps inexplicably pricked her skin. Chapter 8. Alice, 1945. "Oh, you look so beautiful," said Jess, as she fixed Alice's hair with a pear-drop tiara. It was one Alice's mother had worn on her wedding day, and, by luck, her mother had given it to her about 6 months before she had died. "You need to keep this safe," she'd said. "I don't suppose you'll want my wedding dress. It's not fashionable, but the tiara was my mother's, and it will never go out of fashion." As Alice looked at herself in the mirror, she couldn't help thinking that neither she nor her mother had envisaged a wedding day like today. They'd both had much more romantic ideas, but with the war still going on in Europe, and more importantly, with Alice's ever-increasing waistline, they couldn't afford to wait indefinitely for world peace. She smoothed down the dress over her stomach. "Your mum was so kind to make this for me," she said to Jess. "She's not up to your mum's standards, but she doesn't do a bad job," replied Jess. The dress was fitted at the bust, but the waist was gathered and full-bodied in an attempt to hide the pregnancy. Not that it was particularly a secret, but it seemed the decent thing to do. "Well, she's done a good job, and my mum would definitely approve." "How's your dad been?" "He's barely spoken to me the last few weeks," admitted Alice. "Not that I'm bothered. He was so blunt with Brett, it was embarrassing. I thought he might be better once he got used to the idea. I was hoping he'd come around too, especially as I'm going to have to live here for a while. It's a shame you have to stay here until the war is over." "I know. I thought Brett would be all for us getting a place in the village, but he says he has to stay on base. Besides, if we're going to move to America eventually, what's the point? Brett reckons the war is going to be over in the next 18 months. "I hope so. Please, God." Jess picked up the bouquet of purple and yellow freesias. "These are beautiful. I can't remember the last time I saw flowers. It's all spuds and carrots now." She raised them to her nose and breathed in their delicate scent. Most people had turned their gardens over to growing fruit and veg in line with the government's Dig for Victory campaign. "Where did these come from?" "Actually, they were from Mrs. Armitage up at the big house. She gave them to Dad this morning." Mrs. Armitage was well known for her generosity to the community. Despite coming from a wealthy family, she and her sister, Louise Hartwell, had followed in the spirit of their parents' philanthropic ethos, believing their privileged position could be used to benefit those less fortunate. "Ah, that's so lovely," Jess grinned at Alice. "I know it's not the perfect circumstances, but it is so exciting. You're going to be Mrs. Brett Cunningham, and you're going to move to America. I'm going to bloody miss you, and I don't mind admitting I'm so jealous. You get to escape from this place." "I know, it is exciting. Scary too. Brett said his family were surprised, but they are happy he's happy. Apparently, they are looking forward to meeting me. I hope I can get on all right with Mrs. Cunningham, especially as I haven't got my own mum anymore." She blinked back the tears. If she could have one wish in the whole world, it would be to have her mum with her today. Jess gave her a comforting smile and another hug before pulling away. "Now, isn't it time we got you to the church?" "I'd better make sure Dad's ready," said Alice. She'd heard him in the bathroom earlier, and then moving around in his bedroom. She went across the landing, knocking on his door. "Dad, you all right?" There was no answer. Alice tapped again. Dad? This time, she opened the door slowly and poked her head into the room. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his head bowed. In his hands was a photograph. Alice recognised it instantly. It was a photo of her parents' wedding day. She went into the room and sat down on the bed beside him. That's such a lovely photograph, she said softly. You both look so happy.
We were,
he said after a pause.
Your mother never looked so beautiful.
She was always beautiful. Alice swallowed hard, trying not to let the bubble of emotion get the better of her. This was one of the few times she and her father had spoken about her mother. Her father looked up at her.
You look beautiful too.
Thanks, Dad. It wasn't much. There were no displays of affection, no hugging, no apologies or declarations of love and acceptance. But Alice appreciated the truce they appeared to have settled on. He replaced the photograph on the bedside table.
Right, I know it's the bride's prerogative to be late, but all the same, you can't keep a man waiting too long.
As they stepped out of the cottage, Alice gave a gasp when she saw the car. It was Mrs. Armitage's Armstrong Siddeley convertible. White ribbons were tied in a bow on the sidelights and door handles. Mrs. Armitage's driver, Ted Palmer, was standing alongside the vehicle, looking especially smart in his uniform. He nodded towards Alice and opened the rear door.
Compliments of Mrs. Armitage, said her father. There's enough room in there for Jess, too.
A small group of villagers had gathered on the path and clapped as Alice, holding on to her father's arm, walked proudly down the path and climbed into the back of the maroon and black car. Thank you, Dad. Alice exchanged a smile with her father. Ted Palmer dropped Jess at the church and then, as instructed by his employer, took a circuitous route around the village and back again, so Alice could enjoy the moment and arrive at the church in style a few minutes later.
There, just 3 minutes late,
said her father, as the car pulled up outside the church. Before they could climb out, Jess was at the door. Can you go around the block again? She said to the driver. She glanced over at Alice and gave her a quick smile. What's the matter? Asked Alice. Nothing. We just need a few more minutes. Jess shut the door, and much as she'd tried to give her a confident smile, Alice could tell something was wrong. Ted had the subtlety not to drive Alice through the village again, and this time he headed out towards the town at a rather slower speed than he might have otherwise travelled. It was another 7 minutes before they arrived back at the church. Alice could see Jess on the pavement outside, in deep conversation with Howard, Brett's elected best man. The expressions on their faces as they looked at her told Alice everything she needed to know. Brett wasn't there.
Just wait here,
said her father. No, I need to speak to Howard, said Alice. Maybe Brett's been called up for something, a mission. You don't know, it could be some vital top-secret mission he's got to go on. She wasn't sure who she was trying to kid, but if she could delay the moment of truth for just a few seconds more, it was better than having to deal with what really was happening. Alice, said Jess, putting her arm around Alice's shoulders. What's happened? Asked Alice, looking directly at Howard. She couldn't help feeling sorry for him. Whatever he was about to tell her was clearly terribly awkward for him. He exchanged a furtive glance with Jess.
I'm sorry, Alice. I really am, he began.
Just spit it out, lad, said Alice's father. Howard swallowed hard, cleared his throat.
Brett's not coming.
Not coming, repeated Alice. As in, not coming now? Today? Ever? Howard looked down at his feet.
Ever.
Bastard! It was Jess. Sorry, Mr. Renshaw. Alice's father shook his head.
No need to apologise. You're absolutely right.
He brought himself up to his full height.
Where is he now? I don't know,
replied Howard.
He's been transferred out to another base.
Alice could feel the tears building in the back of her eyes, but the last thing she wanted to do was to cry. There was a small crowd gathering outside the church, all waiting to see the bride, but this was turning into something more spectacular for all the wrong reasons. The humiliation was fierce. "When did he go?" she asked.
"This morning."
"And did he put in for this transfer?" she pressed. Poor Howard, having to clear up the mess Brett had left behind him.
"I think his father has connections," Howard admitted. "Look, I don't agree with what he's done at all."
"He must have asked his dad to step in," said Jess. "What a coward!"
"I can think of worse to call him," said Alice's father.
"Did he want to be transferred?" Alice's voice sounded small and broken. Howard awkwardly looked down at the ground again, and then back at Alice.
"He didn't object."
It was Alice's turn to avoid eye contact. "That's a yes, then." At that moment, a military vehicle from the US Air Base pulled up, and an officer stepped out. He looked at Howard.
"Airman Jeffers, you're dismissed. Wait in the car."
Howard saluted his superior.
"Sir."
He paused, took an envelope from his pocket, and passed it to Alice.
"He left this for you. I'm sorry."
Alice managed to nod. She couldn't quite bring herself to speak.
"Off you go,"
the officer instructed Howard.
"I take it you know all about what one of your men has done,"
said Alice's father, glaring at the American.
"What a bloody shambles you lot are. I'm Captain Mitchell, and I was in charge of Airman Cunningham, but as of 0800 hours this morning, he was transferred out, and I'm not at liberty to divulge any further information. Now, I understand this is a difficult situation." "Difficult? It's bloody disgraceful," snapped Alice's father.
"Dad, just leave it," said Alice quietly. She tugged at her father's arm. "Let's go home." Alice's father shrugged off her hand.
"I haven't started yet,"
he said, going nose to nose with the American captain.
"You get that excuse for a man back here so he can fulfill his obligation to my daughter." "I'm sorry, that's not possible," replied Mitchell. "And as far as I'm aware, he has no obligation." "What are you talking about?"
demanded Alice's father. The captain raised his eyebrows.
"The obligation is not his. Impossible, actually. You know, some British girls have been taking advantage of American servicemen. They think there's a better life waiting for them across the water. They haven't always been, how shall I say, honest about the apparent obligations for our airmen and the origin of such obligations."
Alice could see her father's face turn a bright red. The anger was just seconds away from bursting out of him. She stepped between her father and Mitchell.
"I'm not even going to give you the satisfaction of an answer. I suggest you go before you say anything else you regret."
Mitchell turned on his heel and strode back to his car. Alice watched as it sped away from the church. "You go home now," said Jess. "We're causing quite a scene. I'll go and tell the vicar." Alice nodded. The build-up of tears was perilously close to tumbling from her eyes. She pulled her dad by the sleeve, and silently they climbed back into the car. As soon as they arrived home, Alice raced upstairs to her bedroom, dumping the bouquet of flowers onto the floor. It was then she allowed the hot, angry tears to cascade freely down her face as she yanked off her wedding dress. Tears of anger, humiliation, disbelief, and hurt. How could he do this to her? How could he just leave without telling her? In just her petticoat, she climbed into bed, pulling the covers up over her head. She wanted to be left alone. It was then the thought struck her and pulled her up sharp. She wasn't alone, was she? Her hand went to her stomach. She had her baby inside her. It wasn't just her who Brett abandoned. He'd abandoned their child as well. Now it was just her and the baby. No one else. This made her cry all over again, but for different reasons. What on earth was she going to do? How was she going to look after a baby by herself? She ignored the knock at the door the first time, but the second time she raised her head from under the blanket. "Go away, please." She couldn't face talking to her dad, not right now. He'd be full of, "I told you so," and she would have to admit that he was right and she was wrong. The door opened a fraction. "Alice, it's me, Jess." Alice hid her head under the blanket again.
"I just want to be on my own."
The door closed, but Jess's footsteps clipped across the floorboards. Alice felt the bed dip as Jess sat on the edge of the mattress. She pulled the blanket down from Alice's face.
"Want a hug?"
Alice nodded, and Jess leaned over, her arms around Alice's shoulders and her head resting against Alice's.
"I didn't think he'd do that to me,"
sniffed Alice after a while. Jess sat up. "He didn't say anything to Howard either. Apparently, Brett carried on as normal."
"He's obviously a good liar. He had everyone fooled. I'm the biggest idiot there is. I actually believed him."
"What did he say in his letter?" Alice had forgotten all about the letter Howard had given her. She'd stuffed it inside the bouquet of flowers. She got out of bed and retrieved the envelope.
"Dear Alice, I'm sorry, I can't go through with this. My parents are against it too. I'm too young to be tied down to family, especially with a child that my family might not accept as a Cunningham. I wouldn't be able to take you back home, and neither could I stay in England once the war is over. It's best this way. I've enclosed some money for you. I'm sorry it's not more, but I hope it will help. From Brett."
"The cheek," said Jess. "A baby his family might not believe is a Cunningham? You know what he's saying, don't you?" Alice nodded grimly. She didn't need it spelled out by Jess. It was perfectly clear what Brett was implying.
"I don't know what I'm going to do."
"Don't think about that right now," said Jess. "Give yourself a couple of days." She hugged Alice again, and they sat back against the iron bedstead, Alice resting her head on Jess's shoulder. She knew Jess was trying to be helpful, but didn't really know what to say. Because what was there to say?
14th of September, 1944. Carissime Mamma e Sofia. There's talk of us being transferred to England. They have camps there for German and Italian soldiers. Apparently, some of us will be sent to work on the surrounding farms, and I hope I am chosen to do so. The British people are grateful for the help on the land, as, like Italy, all their fit young men are away fighting. This war seems so senseless. Please pray it will end soon. My leg is feeling a lot stronger now. It is still weaker than the other one, but I am doing exercises to strengthen it and am hopeful for a full recovery. How is baby Luca? I expect he is growing up and changing so fast. I wish you were able to send a photograph of him, rather than just these flimsy letters. Does he sleep well at night? I can't wait to meet him. I hope this letter doesn't take too long to reach you. I think it's usually about a month, but I know some are taking longer. Just as well, there is no limit on the amount we can send, as I find it very comforting writing to you both. It's the next best thing to actually talking to you. Our letters are censored before they are sealed and sent via Switzerland and the Red Cross, who then send them on to you. Don't have to pay for them either, thanks to the Red Cross. I will write again as soon as I can. Until we meet again, take care of each other. Il vostro amorevole figlio e fratello, Paolo.
Chapter 9. Nate, 2022. Nate had sensed Rhoda's hesitancy at staying for supper, so he was surprised when she said yes. He wasn't entirely sure why his father wanted her there, and wondered if he was perhaps a little lonely. After collecting the fish and chips and dropping some around to his aunt, who had declined the offer to join them over at Telton Hall because she wanted to watch her TV programme in peace, Nate and Isaac returned to the house. From the hallway, he could hear Rhoda and his father discussing her work. It was nice to hear him talking about something other than the sale of the house for once.
"Where do you want to eat?"
Nate asked, poking his head around the door to the living room.
"The kitchen will be fine for a fish and chip supper,"
said Jack, rising from his chair and gesturing for Rhoda to go ahead of him. Nate led the way down the hall to the kitchen at the rear of the property. "Oh, you've got lots of photos," Rhoda commented, pausing at the vast array of photographs hanging in the hallway. "Some of them are quite old."
"They've been there for years," said Jack. "My mother put some up, and then Nate's mother added to them."
"Bit of a rogues gallery, as they say," said Nate.
"So you grew up here too?" asked Rhoda as they entered the kitchen. Nate put the bag of food on the table and went to the dresser to fetch some plates.
"Yes, that's right. I went to uni, but never really came back to live at the house. I worked in London for a while and then relocated back to the area about 10 years ago."
He laid the plates out on the table and took the food from the bag.
"There you go, Isaac."
"Shame, really," said Jack. "I always hoped I'd be able to pass this place on to the next generation of Hartwells. I did ask Nate to move in when he got married, but he didn't want to. Preferred a fancy new house in town."
Nate mouthed an apology towards Rhoda, but before he could head the conversation off in a different direction, Isaac decided to pipe up.
"Mum didn't like it here. She said it was creepy." "I don't remember her saying it was creepy," said Nate. "Just not her style." "She definitely said creepy. She also said it was cold, drafty, and smelly."
Isaac poked a chip into his mouth, keeping his gaze fixed on his plate.
"Out of the mouth of babes," muttered Jack.
"Isaac tends to speak his mind," said Nate.
He looked over at his son, who was systematically moving his chips as far away from his piece of fish as the plate would allow. "There's nothing wrong with speaking your mind," Rhoda said, and this time without the spike Nate had expected to hear in her voice. "Did you grow up here alone?" she asked Jack, and Nate was grateful for the steer in conversation.
"I had an older sort of stepbrother, William. Everyone called him Billy. He was my mother's stepson from her first marriage, so no blood relation to me or Mum. His father, my mother's first husband, died. Billy didn't have any other family, so when he was injured in the war, my mother took him in. He was quite a bit older than me," said Jack. "Of course, I had my cousin, Aggie, who lives across the road. She's been more like a sister."
"Is the cottage part of the Telton Hall estate?" asked Rhoda.
"No, it's privately owned. My aunt's a tenant. She's allowed to live there for the rest of her time," explained Nate. "It's on an old-fashioned type of agreement. And unfortunately, Dad can't move in there as Aggie's not allowed to sublet, which is technically what she'd be doing. Basically, the agreement is watertight, so no one else can continue to live there after Aggie dies. They don't want another sitting tenant."
"Ah, I see. That's a shame. Where's Billy now?" asked Rhoda. "Is he still alive?" Nate took a sip of his drink. Rhoda didn't beat around the bush when it came to asking questions. Very direct. He looked at Isaac and felt a pang of sadness for his son. Isaac was direct and honest. Nate hoped he'd somehow be able to develop the communication skills to allow himself to fit comfortably into social situations.
"He's dead," said Jack. "Well, we assume he is."
"Assume?"
"Yes. He moved on just after the war. He was always going on about wanting to travel and see a bit more of the world. He just had to wait until the war was over. Had fancy ideas about America or Canada. We weren't very close and didn't keep in touch."
"Git," said Isaac.
G-I-T, noun, an unpleasant person. Grandad said Billy was a git."
"Isaac?"
Nate put down his cutlery.
"You're not to say that. Grandad said it. It doesn't mean you should," said Nate patiently.
He wanted to apologise to Rhoda again, but it almost felt like a betrayal of Isaac. Whenever Isaac said anything like this, Nate always had to quickly evaluate the situation and invoke damage limitation measures. Today, though, he didn't feel he needed to do that. Rhoda had suppressed a smile and carried on as if it was perfectly normal.
"Anyway, it's the truth," said Jack. "He was horrible. He came back from the war with a dodgy leg, had sepsis. I'm sure that poison stayed in his blood, made him very bitter and nasty, a proper git."
Dad?
Nate shook his head at his father.
Proper git,
repeated Isaac.
Sorry about them two,
said Nate. I didn't hear a thing. Rhoda threw Jack a conspiratorial wink. After they'd eaten their supper, Nate cleared the table, refusing to let Rhoda help, and then made them all a drink. I should be getting off soon, she said, as they made their way out of the kitchen. I don't want to hold you up either. Nate checked his watch, surprised at how quickly the past hour had gone.
You're not holding us up. We'll probably head off in about an hour.
Rhoda paused in the hallway. I love looking at old photos. She peered closer. Is this Telton Hall?
Yes, that was the turn of the 19th century, I believe,
said Nate, stepping closer to look at the photo. And this one is more recent? Are these people your family? She was looking at the next photo along.
That was taken during the war,
said Nate.
April 1945,
said Isaac. Rhoda looked down at him. Do you know who the people are?
Don't be worrying about all that now,
said Jack. He had stopped further up the hall at the door to the living room.
Louise Hartwell,
said Isaac, pointing at the photograph. He moved his finger along each of the people.
Billy, Aggie, Alice, Lily, Grandad.
That's impressive, said Rhoda.
I didn't know you knew their names,
said Nate. Isaac had a knack for retaining information.
Aunt Aggie told me,
said Isaac. Is that you in the picture, Jack? Asked Rhoda.
Yes, I was about 10, I think,
replied Jack. And the girls, are they related?
The younger girl, that's Aunt Aggie, replied Nate. She's my dad's cousin. The other two were just staying here.
It's interesting to see how the landscape changed during the war. You can see all the home produce being grown at the front of the house.
Yes, said Nate. They had to farm every bit of spare land to help feed the country.
Rhoda was moving along the hallway, looking at the other photographs. And who are these men? Nate stepped closer to her and peered at the photo.
You know, I must have passed these pictures 1,000 times and never really paid much attention to them. Let's see. Ah, yes, they are the prisoners of war who worked on the farm.
Paolo, Carlo,
said Isaac from behind them. Nate turned to look at his son.
How did you know that? I'm not sure I even knew their names.
Aunt Aggie told me.
Aunt Aggie knows everything, said Nate.
I'm so impressed by your memory, said Rhoda to Isaac. You're amazing.
Amazing,
repeated Isaac.
Amazing, adjective, causing great surprise or wonder.
With that, he walked off down the hall to the living room.
He likes facts and figures, said Nate. Spelling and reciting the meaning is his new thing.
Rhoda nodded. Well, he is even more amazing in that case. Nate hesitated. He didn't like to highlight Isaac's differences from what society regarded as normal, but at the same time, he wanted to tell Rhoda. Rhoda saved him the dilemma. I take it Isaac's on the spectrum. Nate met her gaze. There was no pity in her expression, just a straightforwardness.
Yes, he is, but he's also so much more than that.
Goes without saying. Nate wasn't sure if he'd been gently reprimanded by Rhoda or not, but he appreciated the way she didn't offer sympathetic platitudes, which often followed the realization that Isaac was on the spectrum, well-meaning comments as they were. Nate hated the way his son stopped being Isaac to people who couldn't see past his autism.
He is the constant joy in my life, said Nate.
Again, goes without saying. Rhoda returned her gaze to the wall of photographs. So, these POWs, they worked on the farm?
Actually, I think a couple of them lived on the farm. It wasn't uncommon, especially for the Italians, who opted to cooperate after Italy surrendered. Some of them went back to the POW camp in the evenings, but from what I've heard about my grandmother, Louise Hartwell, she was a very forward-thinking liberal woman.
Sounds like it, said Rhoda. Do you think it was one of these men who made the stained glass window?
I think it was, actually. I don't know a great deal about it. Dad's not very good on the details. I could ask Aggie. Would she know about the family Bible and the ledgers?
Quite possibly. I'll have a chat with her tomorrow.
Nate moved along the hall with Rhoda as she looked at more photographs.
You should be investigating this case, not the police.
I don't think Shepherd seemed very interested in pursuing it, said Rhoda. Aren't you interested? Concerned? Curious even? There she was again, doing that thing where she spoke her mind and made him feel he was being told off, like he'd got the answer to a question wrong, and she was giving him the chance to correct himself before it was too late.
I am, as it happens, he said. I don't think I'd be offering to find out more information if I wasn't.
True, she said simply. Ah, this is your father, isn't it? Rhoda tapped a photograph halfway along the wall.
Yep, he's about 12 in that photo. And along here, you can see when my mother started adding to the wall. There's their wedding photo, and this one here is when I was born. I was a surprise baby, apparently. My mother's not about anymore. My parents separated after I finished uni. They were just waiting for me to leave home. She lives up in Scotland now.
Sorry to hear that. Nate gave a shrug.
It happens. It hasn't scarred me or anything.
He lowered his voice.
In fact, it was a relief. I used to hate coming home as there was always an atmosphere. That's why I went off to London.
It must be so nice to have all this family history right here, even if your parents have split, said Rhoda, turning back to the wall pictures. All these photographs to look at whenever you want. Nate gave a shrug.
I guess so. I've never really thought about it, to be honest. They've just always been there.
Lucky you, Rhoda said softly. This is the end of CD 2. The book continues on CD 3. CD 3. Chapter 10. Alice, 1945. Alice stepped off the train, her battered brown suitcase in hand, and looked for the exit. She took the slip of paper from her pocket and checked the address and directions. Mrs. Armitage had stepped in to help when she heard that Brett had abandoned her. After speaking with Alice's father, it was agreed that Alice should go and stay in Somerset with Mrs. Armitage's sister, Louise Hartwell, for the duration of her confinement and the 6 weeks that would follow the birth of the baby. During this time, Mrs. Hartwell would arrange for the adoption of the child. Mrs. Armitage had been the one to talk to Alice and convince her this was the best course of action, not just for Alice herself, but for the baby. Alice had been too numb to argue, and what was the point? Everything Mrs. Armitage said was true. What future could Alice offer a baby? An 18-year-old mother, no more than a child herself, with no husband, no home, and no income, as she wouldn't be able to work once the child was born. Rice's department store certainly wouldn't employ an unmarried mother. And so the arrangements were made, and within 2 weeks of being stood up at the altar, Alice was now in Somerset. She left the station and turned left, where, according to the instructions, she was to walk along the road heading out of the village until she came to a sign which marked the way to Telton Hall. It didn't take too long before Alice found herself at the gates to Telton Hall. The farmhouse was built in a creamy-coloured stone, different from that back home, with sash windows symmetrically placed across the face of the building. 2 dormer windows looked out from the rooftop. Smoke plumed from the chimney pot, and although the paint was peeling from the gate, there was a homely feel to the place. The grassed area which ran alongside the driveway and the garden at the front of Telton Hall had all been given over to growing fruit and vegetables. The whole of the right-hand side looked like it had been dedicated to potatoes, and the other side to other types of root vegetables, some of which were just beginning to poke their way through the soil. The rumble of an engine from behind took her by surprise. She turned around to see an army truck trundling up the driveway. As it passed, she could see 6 men sitting in the back,
wearing some sort of uniform that she didn't recognise. A couple of them waved and called out to her.
"Hello, pretty girl."
Alice was shocked. She could tell by their accent they weren't British, but German and maybe Italian. What on earth were enemy soldiers doing driving around the place? The door to the house opened, and a woman in her mid-40s, with her hair pulled back, wearing a long white apron over a blue floral dress, called to her. "Are you Alice Renshaw?" Yes, I am." Alice looked to where the truck had now parked up, and several men were disembarking. She turned back to the woman. "Who are they?" The woman laughed. "Oh, don't worry. We're not being invaded. They're the prisoners of war. They work here on the farm." Alice knew her mouth had gaped open again. "Prisoners of war? Working here on the farm? We need all the help we can get with most of the men off fighting," said the woman. "For the most part, they're polite young men who seem only too glad to be out of the war. Anyway, I'm Louise Hartwell." "Pleased to meet you," replied Alice automatically, while still trying to take in what Mrs. Hartwell had just explained. She wasn't quite sure how she felt about enemy soldiers on the farm. It certainly wasn't what she had expected. "You'd better come inside," said Mrs. Hartwell. Alice followed the older woman into the terracotta-tiled hallway. The door on the right was ajar, and Alice could see it was the sitting room. The door on the left was closed. Mrs. Hartwell led her down the hallway to the back of the house and into a large kitchen. Well, certainly larger than the one Alice had grown up with in their two-bedroom terraced house in Suffolk. A black range occupied the side wall, with a big mantel around it and shelving for various pots and pans. Above that was a drying rack, tied up out of the way with some laundry draped over the wooden rungs. On the opposite wall was a pine dresser, displaying mismatched crockery and various storage jars. On the other wall was the window, with a sink below and a wooden drainer. A blue and white checked curtain was strung below the sink. The tautness in the wire long since expired, so the hem of the fabric touched the orange terracotta tiles. Another woman, older than Mrs. Hartwell, was standing at the pine kitchen table in the centre of the room, kneading dough. Standing next to her, peeling potatoes, was a young, dark-haired girl who looked about 12 or 13. "This is Cook," said Mrs. Hartwell, and then to her employee, "This is Alice Renshaw. She's come to stay with us." "Nice to meet you," said Cook, smiling at Alice. "And this here is my niece, Agatha," said Mrs. Hartwell. "She lives across the road in Telton Cottage with my sister-in-law. Agatha's and Jack's fathers were brothers, but sadly neither are no longer with us." "Hello, Agatha," said Alice. "Hello," said the young girl. "Everyone calls me Aggie, except my aunt." She gave an exaggerated sigh and rolled her eyes. Mrs. Hartwell chuckled. "You'll have to excuse my niece. She's rather dramatic." The warmth between Aggie and Mrs. Hartwell was clear, something that reassured Alice. She could imagine her mother being just like Mrs. Hartwell. "I'll make you a drink and something to eat once I've finished here," said Cook. "It's all right. I'll do it." Mrs. Hartwell busied herself with putting the kettle on the range to boil and ladling a bowl of soup out for Alice. "Sit yourself down." "Thank you," said Alice. The smell of the soup was making her stomach rumble. "Once you've eaten, I'll show you to your room and introduce you to Lily. You'll be sharing with her. Nice young girl who will show you around," said Mrs. Hartwell, placing the bowl of soup on the table. "I'll be back in a minute. If you need anything, Cook or Agatha will help you." "Don't look so scared," said Cook, after her employer had left the room. "Mrs. Hartwell's a good woman, and she'll look after you. And Lily's a good girl, too. She came here last year and liked it so much she didn't want to leave. Now eat up before it goes cold." A short time later, Mrs. Hartwell returned to collect Alice and led her back out into the hall and up the staircase, which was at least twice as wide as the staircase at home. It looked more like it belonged in Rice's department store. "It's a lovely house," said Alice, as they reached the first floor.
It's not quite as grand as my sister's house, and we don't have all the staff, so apologies if it's not quite what you were expecting. We do have running water and an inside toilet, so not too far behind the Suffolk contingent in terms of luxury. There was a touch of humour to her voice, and she smiled at Alice, underlining there was no sibling rivalry between the households. Now, this floor is where me and my 2 sons, Billy and Jack, have a room each. Billy is actually my stepson from my first marriage. He lives here since being discharged from the army on medical grounds, as he hasn't got any family. Jack is my son with Mr. Hartwell. Anyway, you're along here. You'll be with Lily. She paused at a door on the landing. This door leads up to the attic. We have a couple of Italian prisoners who live up there, so don't be alarmed if you see them in the house. You shouldn't need to go up there. They bring their own bedding down and keep it clean themselves. Besides, the stairs are very steep and I wouldn't want you slipping.
Yeah, we don't want any accidents, came a male voice from the foot of the main stairs. We can't afford to have you laid up in bed with a twisted ankle or carted off to the hospital for something more serious.
Alice and Mrs. Hartwell looked around. Don't be saying things like that, Billy. Mrs. Hartwell turned to Alice. That's my stepson. Alice felt strangely unsure of herself as she gave a polite smile towards the man. Hello. He was leaning against the newel post, with one hand on the top of the post and the other holding on to a walking stick. His dark hair was cut short at the back and sides, with a fringe that had fallen over his left eye. His grey shirt was rolled up at the sleeves.
You must be Alice,
he said, his gaze momentarily flitting to her stomach and then back to her eyes. That's right. Pleased to meet you.
Pleased to meet you too. Louise has told me all about you.
Alice felt an uneasy sensation roll around in her stomach, and she pulled her cardigan across her body. She wasn't quite sure she liked the tone to his voice, but not knowing the first thing about him, she gave him the benefit of the doubt and bit down a smart reply that was threatening to burst from her mouth. Her father had always said her smart mouth would get her into trouble. Now wasn't the time for that to happen, not when she'd been inside the house for barely an hour. Let's go along to your room. Mrs. Hartwell headed off down the hall. Alice followed, taking a glance back over her shoulder at Billy, whose slow smile and wink had her scampering after her hostess. The room had 3 wrought-iron single beds. 2 were made up with heavy blankets and eiderdowns, while the 3rd was unmade. Is it just the 2 of us? Asked Alice. Yes, but I've room for 1 more if needs be. This bed is yours. Lily's got the one over here. Mrs. Hartwell crossed the room and pulled the curtains apart, then opened the window. I'm always telling her to let some fresh air in. Right, I'll leave you to unpack. The bathroom is back along the hall. There's a jug and bowl on the dresser here that you can fill up with water. Dinner is at 6 o'clock sharp. If you're late and it's all gone, then you'll be going hungry. Breakfast at 6:30. Alice nodded. She walked over to the window, taking in the glorious view before her. It's so beautiful here, she said softly. Have you ever been out of Suffolk? Alice shook her head. No, not really. My mum took me to London once to visit a relation, but I was only young and I don't really remember much about it. Well, I've never been to London, so you've done more than me now. Alice smiled as she continued to look out of the window. It was then she noticed a stone building on top of the hill. What's that up there? Mrs. Hartwell followed Alice's gaze. Oh, that's the family chapel. Alice inwardly winced. She wasn't the religious kind at all, least not since her mother had died. She hoped she hadn't now stepped into an ultra-religious household. It looks... She struggled for a word other than bleak, but failed. Uninviting, supplied Mrs. Hartwell. Don't worry, I hate the bloody place. Up there on the hill, catching all the bad weather, it's as draughty as anything. You won't ever see me up there. I made that perfectly clear to Mr. Hartwell when I married him. Alice smiled in relief. You didn't get married up there, then? No, I didn't. Local village church. Right, well, I've got things to do. Have the afternoon to yourself, and I'll see you for dinner at 6.
Thank you, Mrs. Hartwell. I really appreciate you taking me in, said Alice sincerely. The older woman paused in the doorway. Her face softened for a moment before she gave a small nod and bustled out of the room, calling over her shoulder as she went, 6 o'clock sharp? Alice turned back to the window, her gaze inexplicably drawn towards the chapel. Her first impression of it remained, a bleak and unwelcoming building.
3rd of January, 1945. Carissime Mamma e Sofia. Buon anno. Happy New Year. If you have been praying for me, asking God to look over me, then I am happy to say your prayers have been answered. I have been moved to a camp in the west of England. I am in a lovely part of the country. It reminds me of home. There are rolling hills, all the different shades of green, and there are wooded areas too. The camp is on the outskirts of a small village, and there is a farm where I am working. I have been working there for a week, helping with the animals and with the crops they are growing. There is a large kitchen garden that I know you would love, Mother. You could make some wonderful dishes with the vegetables and fruit which are grown there. The owner, Mrs. Hartwell, is kind to us. She has 2 sons, and there are some young women who work here too. They help on the farm and in the kitchen. One of them is a fine mechanic and repaired the old tractor they have when not one of us could work out what was wrong. There is a chapel on the farm. It is a strange building. It sits high up on a hill all on its own. It is a private chapel just for the family, but I don't think anyone uses it much. They go to the local village church. I have asked if I can attend church on a Sunday and am waiting to find out. As you know, I don't much believe in God. But being so far from home and feeling so helpless, it's the only thing I can think to do that might be of any use. We are taken from the camp every day by truck under guard of British soldiers, and we are dropped off at the different farms each morning and then picked up again in the evening. Some of the prisoners have been given accommodation on the farms and live there. I am told that they are the most trusted prisoners, and you have to earn the right to stay at the farms. There is already an Italian prisoner living where I am working. I am going to try to see if they will eventually let me live on the farm. It will be so much nicer than having to go back to the camp each night and be locked up. Every night, before we have to black out the windows, I lie in my bunk and look up at the sky through the window, and I pray that you and Sophia and baby Luca are looking up at the same sky, the same moon. It makes me feel closer to home and to you both. I wouldn't admit it to any of the men here, but I have felt homesick. I'm desperate for the time when this war is over and I can come home. I will never complain about being bored or having nothing to do. It will make me happy just to spend time with my family. I must sign off now, as there is no more space on this paper to write. Until we meet again, take care of each other. Il vostro amorevole figlio e fratello, Paolo.
Chapter 11. Rhoda, 2022. 2 days had passed since Rhoda's fish and chip supper with the Hartwells, and she still hadn't heard anything from D.S. Shepherd as to whether the chapel had been released as a crime scene, and more importantly, whether they were going to conduct a murder investigation, or at least try to find out who the victim was. It had been constantly on her mind, and the previous night she'd even begun searching the internet, trying to find out a bit more of the history of Telton Hall, in the hope that she herself might find some sort of clue to the identity of the body. So far, she hadn't found out anything more than Nate had told her already. Telton Hall had always been a farm and had always been in the Hartwell family. It had moved from Derry to Arable after the First World War, and during the Second World War had taken on German and Italian POWs as farm labour. Louise Hartwell had a philanthropic approach and was known for taking those less fortunate than herself under her wing. Rhoda had gleaned that last snippet from an online parish publication aimed at tourists. The stained glass window also got a mention, but the name of the craftsman wasn't given. None of this helped her in identifying the body in the church, though. She rinsed her cup out and left it on the drainer, then gathered up her bag and keys, ready to head over to the workshop at the museum. The drive over to Singlewood Museum was always a pleasure, especially when the South Downs came into sight, and that morning was no exception. Rhoda reached the crest of the hill, where the valley rolled out beyond in a mix of fields and woodland. The museum was situated at the foot of the hill, and soon she was pulling into the staff car park. After parking her car, Rhoda headed for the main entrance, stopping to have a quick chat with the ladies in the gift shop and a passing exchange of pleasantries with Stuart, the head groundsman. She liked coming to Singlewood. It was a place where she felt comfortable, and she absolutely loved the location. The structures the museum had gathered over the years were at the foot of the hill, forming a town centre. Spreading out beyond that were the residential homes and a schoolhouse. Rhoda's workshop was set back off the main street, in a large 1920s barn which had been rescued from a local farm. She shared the studio with two other crafters, Harry, who was a potter, and Helen, who spun the wool from the sheep on the site and then knitted or crocheted items for the gift shop. Today, Rhoda had the studio to herself. She switched on the radio, poured a cup of tea from her flask, and sat down to start working on a small private commission that had come in the day before, a sun catcher to celebrate a wedding anniversary. Before she could begin her work, the phone rang. It was D.S. Shepherd.
"Just wanted to let you know that the chapel has been released now," he said. "You're free to go back in there."
"Okay, thanks. I was wondering about that last night." Rhoda moved a piece of glass from the workbench to the cutting table. "Did you find anything else out about the man?"
"Only that he was probably in his early 20s, 5'10", slight build."
"How long has he been there?"
"Hard to say, but forensics estimate anywhere from 80 to 90 years.
"And cause of death?"
"You ask a lot of questions."
"That's how you find things out," replied Rhoda.
"Well, seeing as you've asked, blunt force trauma, as we suspected."
"Murdered, then?"
"Probably. Can't say for certain."
Rhoda got the feeling Shepherd wasn't telling her everything. "Are you going to investigate the murder?" Shepherd cleared his throat.
"It's been decided it wouldn't be in the public interest to investigate such a historic incident. We've spoken with the Hartwells again, but they can't provide any further information, and in all probability, anyone connected with the deceased are probably dead themselves."
"What? Are you serious?"
"I'm sorry. I know that's not what you wanted to hear, but the decision was taken by my superiors. It's out of my hands."
"Taken by your superiors with your recommendation?" Rhoda stood up straighter. "What about the man's family? He might have children. Surely they deserve to know what's happened to their father."
"I hear you," said Shepherd. "But without being able to identify him, there's no way of tracing any family. He might not even be local. Telton Hall was a bit of a halfway home. People came and went quite regularly, and as it wasn't an official establishment like a care home or a poorhouse or anything like that, there are no reliable records."
"Have you looked at missing persons?"
"Of course. Records are a bit sketchy that far back, but even in those we do have, no one has been reported fitting that description," explained Shepherd. "And it's not just that, but I'm sure you know how stretched the police force is. There just aren't the resources or the spend to investigate something like this. If the man was murdered, then the killer is more than likely to be dead too."
"That's what it's down to, really, isn't it?" said Rhoda. "Funding."
"It's a consideration, of course."
"Have you told the Hartwells? What was Jack's response?"
"I've just got off the phone to Nate Hartwell, and he's in agreement with me, and apparently so is his father."
Rhoda made a huffing noise. She had dealt with the authorities enough in her lifetime to know when she was banging her head against a brick wall. Pursuing this any further with Shepherd was one such occasion. As for Nate Hartwell, that pissed her off. She'd told him about Dean, for some unknown reason, and she thought he had understood and was in her corner on this.
She'd certainly got that one wrong. Jack, she could understand to some degree. He had enough on his plate at his time of life. Okay, well, thanks for the call. Rhoda felt both deflated and angry after speaking to Shepherd. She could only imagine the torture that man's family must have endured in the weeks, months, and years after his death. Even if it was at least 80 years ago, Rhoda felt such a sense of awareness. She knew it was because of her own agony, but it felt amplified today. She looked down at the piece of glass she needed to cut, and even the usual joy and comfort she felt from her creative work was vanished. With little enthusiasm, she picked up the glass and placed it over the paper design pattern, taped down on the workbench. Using the glass cutter tool, she rolled the blade over the glass, scoring the shape of the piece. The creak of the glass and the squeak of the cutting wheel as she applied pressure sounded louder than usual. She pushed harder as she tried to relegate thoughts of the phone call with Shepherd from her mind. A crack snapped her from those thoughts. Shit. She'd used too much force and broken the glass. Rhoda let out a long, frustrated sigh, put the broken piece to one side in case she could use it on a smaller section, and brushed the flakes of glass into the bucket she kept at the side of the workbench. With a fresh piece of glass, she started again, only to do exactly the same thing. What is wrong with me? It was a rhetorical question to no one, not even herself. She knew exactly what was wrong with her. Was she the only one who cared about the remains they'd found at the chapel? Why was she the only one who was bothered? She picked up her mobile phone, and despite already having looked at it first thing that morning, she went to the Dean Sullivan Missing Person Facebook page. She clicked on the notification. Dean Sullivan Missing Person has 1 new like. That was unusual these days. It tended to be the other way around, where people were dropping off, having lost interest. She clicked further into the page management settings to see who had liked the page. She raised her eyebrows at the information. Nate Hartwell. That was interesting, and she felt inexplicably grateful. There was also a notification that Nate Hartwell had shared her post. It was the one she had pinned to the top, that everyone saw when they clicked on the page, with a picture of Dean smiling at the camera, standing at the top of the trundle of the South Downs National Park, overlooking the city of Chichester and the south coast beyond. The sun was shining, and it was one of Rhoda's favourite pictures of her brother. They'd met up on their 18th birthday, and instead of hitting the pubs and legally drinking for the first time, they'd gone for a hike. Dean had turned up at Rhoda's foster home, and her foster mum had driven them up to the vantage spot. It had been a glorious day, not just because of the weather, but because they had celebrated the freedom that lay before them, even though Dean's future wasn't as secure as her own. Rhoda clicked on Nate's profile. She wasn't sure why. She knew a lot about him from just spending the day at Telton Hall, but she was curious to get more of an insight into his private life. She hadn't quite been able to weigh him up the other day. Initially, she wasn't that impressed with him, but as the afternoon had progressed, she'd found herself re-evaluating her opinion. Unsurprisingly, his privacy was set to the max, and apart from his profile photo and banner, there was nothing for Rhoda to see. His profile picture was of him and Isaac on holiday in the sun somewhere. A sparkling blue swimming pool was behind them, their hair wet, and droplets of water were sitting on Nate's bare and bronzed shoulders. The header picture was another picture of him and Isaac, but this time standing on a cliff with Durdle Door in the background. Rhoda navigated back to Dean's page, and underneath the main post, she tagged Nate, thanking him for liking and sharing. It was something she did every time there was any interaction on the page. It helped keep the page active, and that, in turn, helped remind people about Dean. Rhoda felt a sense of gratitude at this small gesture of support from Nate. Her earlier anger, directed at Shepherd, eased. Picking up a fresh piece of glass, she set about cutting it,
this time in a calmer and more controlled manner, and, more importantly, successfully. Later that evening, when she was back in her flat, there was a ping from her phone, a Facebook alert. It was a message on Dean's page. Rhoda quickly looked at the notification. Nate Hartwell has replied to your comment.
Any time.
That was all he'd said. Rhoda didn't know why she had hoped for more, but she liked his comment. She toyed with the idea of sending him a friend request, but ultimately decided against it. She wasn't in the habit of friending someone she didn't really know, and besides, Nate might think it was a bit weird. She put her phone to one side, together with any notion of making any further contact with Nate Hartwell. That night, Rhoda didn't sleep well at all. She'd spent the day working in her studio, but she'd found it hard concentrating, and when she'd gone to bed, her mind had flitted from thinking about the body in the chapel to Nate and then to her brother. She'd thought her nights of staring at the ceiling and imagining all sorts of scenarios concerning Dean's disappearance had long since gone, but they had come back that night with a vengeance. She was awake by 6 the following morning. Her head felt groggy, as if she had a hangover, and even her body protested at being forced to move. There was, of course, a remedy for this sense of weight, both in her mind and body: the sea. It was one of the reasons she'd started swimming in the sea in the first place. She used to just come down to the beach early in the mornings for a walk, to clear her head and try to have some thinking space. It was on one of those days she'd met Shani, who had waded out of the water and spotted Rhoda sitting up against a breakwater. Later, Shani had told Rhoda that she had sensed her sadness immediately and had likened Rhoda to a frightened, abandoned puppy. Shani couldn't leave the beach without checking she was okay, and thus their friendship had begun, gently on Shani's part and tentatively on Rhoda's. The open water swimming had proved a lifeline for Rhoda and was a staple part of her daily routine. Shani was already in the water when Rhoda got down to the beach. The sea was flat, and the gentle lap of the high-tide waves was inviting as the hazy early morning sun shimmered on the surface. Seagulls lined up on the breakwater, and 1 or 2 were bobbing on the tranquil waters. Rhoda left her towel on the beach and made her way into the water. She gave a small gasp as the cold took her by surprise, but she knew from experience that getting her shoulders under the water and swimming straight away would help her adjust to the temperature.
"Ah, I'm glad I've seen you today," said Shani.
"Why's that?" asked Rhoda, as they floated on their backs, drifting with the rhythmic rise and fall of the waves.
"You haven't seemed yourself the last couple of days, and last night I couldn't stop thinking about you."
"Have you been fiddling with those crystals of yours again?" Rhoda asked good-humouredly. She closed her eyes and tilted her head back further, spreading her arms and legs out like a starfish. Shani was a spiritual soul, and although Rhoda teased her, she had to admit Shani was intuitive and had this ability to see through the facade that Rhoda sometimes needed to throw up around herself. "You don't have to worry about me."
"I know I don't have to, but I like to. Want to tell me what's bothering you?"
Rhoda didn't answer immediately. Normally, when people asked if she was okay, she was quick to reassure them, because if she didn't, she'd be in danger of letting them see her vulnerable side. The side where she was fully aware she had trust issues, but at the same time, she didn't care. It was easier not to trust people. That way, they didn't let you down. But Shani was different. She was someone who was genuinely concerned. "I can't stop thinking about the remains found at the chapel. I don't know whether to be angry or sad."
"Too close to home?"
"Yes, I guess so. It's kicked up a lot of feelings I have about Dean's disappearance."
"Feelings you're not ready to deal with, or would sooner not?"
"Something like that." Rhoda rolled back over onto her front and began to tread water. "I feel so helpless with Dean. The last year it's been like hitting a brick wall. I I feel I've let him down. And yes, I do know he might not actually want to be found, but what if he does? I can't stop until I have some answers. And then this body at the chapel. What if there's a family out there having the exact same feelings as I am? What if they have been crippled all this time, not knowing? Maybe I can help them instead. Shani looked out of the corner of her eye at Rhoda. You can't save everyone. But I can try. So what is your exact dilemma? What's troubling you? There was no challenge in Shani's voice. She had this way of simply posing questions. Rhoda was silent again for a moment. That the police aren't looking into it. And that's what's causing the negativity? Yes, I suppose it is. There was, of course, no suppose about it. Rhoda knew without a doubt that it was making her feel fed up and frustrated. How about channeling that negativity in another direction, into something positive? Don't worry about what you can't change, only what you can. Rhoda considered what her friend was saying. You mean I could try to find out who the body in the chapel is and find his family? If that's what you think will help. Shani flipped onto her front and began swimming parallel to the shoreline. Rhoda swam after her. But what if I can't find out who he is, or who his family are? That will be 2 people I've failed. But what if you succeed? Shani stopped swimming and stood up in the waist-high water. What if you put someone else's family out of their misery? Besides, you're going to be at Telton Hall for a while, sorting out that window. Use the opportunity to see if you can solve the mystery. You've got until the sale completes. Rhoda nodded. You're right, she said, looking out at the horizon, where the faint outline of a row of wind turbines shimmered in the morning haze. Just because I can't help myself, it doesn't mean I can't help someone else. She smiled at her friend. I simply need to convince the Hartwells to get on board. Despite what they say, I'm sure the key to the man's identity lies within Telton Hall. Chapter 12. Alice, 1945. Alice stood looking out of the bedroom window at Telton Hall for a long while. From her position, she could also see the fields beyond, where some men, whom she presumed were POWs, were standing on a trailer drawn by a tractor and cutting back the hedges. Alice's gaze travelled down to the walled back garden of the farm. If it had ever been used for pleasure, there was no sign of that now. The garden had been sectioned off into 4 areas, and although Alice was no gardener, she could take an educated guess that 2 of those sections were vegetables, 1 was fruit, and the other maybe a herb garden. She wasn't sure and made a note to ask about it. Maybe she could learn how to grow vegetables and fruit. It might be something she could do when she was further along her pregnancy. As she pondered this idea, she saw the gate in the back wall open and a young man walk through, carrying a trough. He was wearing a heavy knitted jumper and a pair of grey trousers that had a red circle on the front of one of the legs. The sound of footsteps in the hallway distracted her. The bedroom door opened, and in came a young woman about Alice's own age, maybe a little younger. She was wearing the same kind of clothes as the man in the garden, but minus the red circle patch. A headscarf was wrapped around her head, fighting to keep the blonde curls at bay. Hello, I'm Lily. She walked over and held out her hand. You must be Alice. That's right. Nice to meet you, said Alice, shaking hands with her roommate. I was just looking out of the window, she added, worried Lily would think she was nosing around her belongings. Lily moved next to her and looked down on the garden. Eyeing up the prisoners, eh? Her Midlands accent coated her words. What? No. Alice took a step back from the window, as if to reinforce the notion. Lily remained in place. There's 2 of them here, said Lily. She slid the window closed. They're Italians and sleep upstairs in the attic. Yes, Mrs. Hartwell said. So they don't go back to... Alice wasn't quite sure where they'd go back to, and left the sentence unfinished.
There is a camp, but some of them stay here on the farm, the ones that can be trusted. The others come in on a daily basis, and there's an armed guard with them. Are they trouble? No, they're all very polite and do as they're told. Not that I speak to them much, but you have to sometimes, out in the fields or with the animals. Seems strange them being here. Why's he got a red patch on his trousers? Asked Alice. So if they try to escape, it's easy to see they're POWs. Have many escaped? Not in all the time I've been here. Lily turned away from the window, as if bored now. How long is that? Asked Alice. She sneaked another look at the prisoner as he stopped at the vegetable plot and began to dig up some onions with a small trowel. Nearly 2 years. Mrs. Hartwell took me in for 6 months and I ended up staying. Not that I had anywhere to go. Why did you come here? Alice looked around at Lily, who was sitting at the dressing table, having untied her headscarf, and was now brushing her hair. Same reason as you, I'm guessing. Lily paused and looked over at Alice. Bun in the oven, as they say. Alice's hand automatically went to her stomach. She swallowed. That's right. I'm having a baby. It sounded strange to be speaking the words out loud and actually admitting. No, not admitting. That sounded like she'd done something wrong, and she refused to see it like that. No, she was telling people she was pregnant now. All this time, she'd had to talk in a whisper about the pregnancy in case anyone heard. Well, no longer. It's due in October. Lily resumed her hairbrushing. Mrs. Hartwell is very good. She knows people who will find the baby a good home. I suppose so. Lily stopped brushing her hair. You don't sound very convinced. I'm not sure I am. It wasn't my decision to come here. Lily turned around on the stool. How are you going to keep a baby? A single woman? No man's going to want to take you and another man's child on. When this war is over, and I've heard it will be soon, think of all those young men who are coming home. They're going to want to get themselves a woman. They'll be spoilt for choice. They're not going to want a woman with a baby. It was a conversation Alice was familiar with, and although she knew it made sense, she still couldn't fully commit to it. She returned to looking out of the window. The prisoner had filled the trug he had been carrying with onions and stood up, hands on his hips. He arched his back and rolled his shoulder blades, and then his neck. Whether he sensed her watching or had simply looked up at the window, Alice didn't know, but his gaze met hers momentarily. Alice looked away. She wanted to dip out of sight, but at the same time didn't want to face Lily, who was telling her about the lovely couple who had adopted her baby, and how her child was going to have a life Lily could only ever dream of giving her. Alice looked back towards the Italian. He was still looking her way. Then he suddenly looked towards the house, and his whole demeanour changed. He picked up the trug in one hand and gripped the trowel in the other. Alice could hear someone shouting, but she couldn't make out the words. She craned her neck to see who it was and saw Billy limping down the path towards the Italian. He stopped in front of him, his face only inches away, their stares locked on each other. What's going on down there? Lily got up and scrambled over the bed to look out of the window. Oh, that's Billy, Mrs. Hartwell's stepson. No one likes him, but then he doesn't like anyone either. He's always getting on at someone, especially the POWs we have here, Paolo and Carlo. I met him briefly earlier, said Alice, careful not to say too much just yet. She liked Lily, but she didn't know if she could trust her. That was nice for you, said Lily. He's an angry git. Came back from the war all messed up. It's made him angry at everyone and everything. Doesn't help that there are POWs here. He takes it out on them, as if they're personally responsible for what happened to him. Must be hard for him. The altercation appeared to be over, as Billy did his best to march off down the path towards the end of the garden. The Italian gave a glance up at the window, and then headed in the opposite direction towards the kitchen. Don't be wasting your time with any sympathy for him. Take it from me, he's plain nasty. Mrs. Hartwell doesn't even like him, and she likes everyone. You'll be best keeping away from him. Lily went back to fussing with her hair.
Hopefully, one day he'll clear off, like he keeps threatening to do, always moaning about how he hates it here. Alice spent some time unpacking. It didn't take too long, as she didn't have much. "I think I'll go for a walk around the farm," she said, as she closed the drawer to the dressing table. "I'll come with you if you want. I can show you around." They made their way downstairs to the kitchen, where the young girl, Aggie, was now chopping up cabbage and Cook was putting the dough in the oven.
"Ah, all settled in?" asked Cook.
"Yes, thank you," replied Alice. "Lily is just going to show me around."
"Righty-o. Don't be late for dinner. It's rabbit tonight."
Once out of the house, Lily pulled a face. "I really don't like rabbit, and we have it a lot here. I don't think I've ever had it. Lucky you. It's all right if they manage to catch a nice one, but sometimes they come back with some really old rangy things." "Who catches the rabbits?" Lily slipped her arm through Alice's as they walked down the brick path of the kitchen garden towards the gate. "Billy and Jack. Jack is Mrs. Hartwell's son." "What's Jack like?" "Much nicer than Billy. Jack's just a boy. I reckon he was a surprise for Mrs. Hartwell, if you get what I mean." Lily gave Alice a nudge in the ribs with her elbow. It occurred to Alice that maybe that's why Mrs. Hartwell had sympathy for unmarried women who found themselves pregnant. Maybe it was because she knew that these things happened. Alice was reminded of her father calling it a mistake when talking to Mrs. Armitage. But to Alice's mind, it could never be a mistake. It had just happened. "Jack's too young to be called up, then?" Lily gave a laugh. "Yes, he's only 10. What about Mr. Hartwell?" "Oh, he's been dead quite a few years. That's when Mrs. Hartwell started taking women in. I suppose she needed the money. I take it you had to pay her." Alice wasn't quite sure if it was right to talk money to Lily. She had the feeling that Mrs. Hartwell wouldn't like it. She opted for a vague answer. "My dad sorted it out with her. He works for her sister, Mrs. Armitage. About the only good thing he's done for me, and that wasn't for my benefit. He just wanted me out of the way. What about you? Have you got any parents?" "Yes, but I haven't seen them for nearly a year. I haven't had the money, and they're busy with my brothers and sisters. I'm the eldest of 7. "Wow, don't you miss them?" Lily gave a shrug. "Not really. Not my parents, anyway. I miss my brothers and sisters sometimes, but not that much. I was always being asked to look after them while my mum and dad went to work, or in my dad's case, went to the pub, and my mum went looking for him." "Does Mrs. Hartwell ever ask you to look after Jack?" "No, she doesn't really go anywhere much, and if she does, there's always Cook to keep an eye on him," explained Lily. "He's no trouble, though. Nice kid. And Aggie, she's nice too. I don't mind them hanging around. It's different when they're not actually related to you. It's easier to put up with them." "I sometimes wish I had a younger brother or sister," said Alice. They had reached the gate to the hill now, and Lily swung it open, letting Alice through first. "It's not all sweetness and light. Sometimes having siblings is a complete pain. That's why I wasn't ready to have kids of my own. I had been playing mum for long enough. Besides, what have I got to offer to a child?" Alice didn't answer. She thought Lily was directing the question towards her as much as explaining her own reasons. And Lily was right. Alice didn't have a lot to offer, not in the material sense. But she did have love. Just as her mum had loved her, Alice had an abundance of love. And she was saving it all for her baby. 5th of March, 1944. Carissime Mamma e Sofia, I received your letter, and I cannot say how sad I was to hear about Franco. I have been hoping all this time for good news about him. I even went to church last month and prayed for him. My dearest sister, I am so sorry you have lost such a wonderful husband, and Luca a father. It is tragic, and I am heartbroken for you. All the usual things I would write to you about seem trivial now. I wish I could be there with you to look after you and comfort you. I cannot believe I have been here 6 months now. In some ways the time has gone quickly, and in other ways it has gone so slowly it is like being tortured every day. It is times like this when I know I should be home to look after you,
That being here is pure hell. Stay strong for your son, Sophia, and I know Mama will be looking after you. Look up at the sky when you receive this letter. Look for the brightest star, and know that I, too, shall be looking at it. Il vostro amorevole figlio e fratello, Paolo.
Chapter 13. Nate, 2022. Nate looked at the bag D.S. Shepherd had given him, with the ring inside. As there was not going to be an investigation, the police no longer needed to hold on to any potential evidence they had gathered.
What do you want to do with this? Nate asked his father, holding the bag between his finger and thumb. Jack shrugged. Throw it away. Not exactly buried treasure.
Nate weighed the bag in his hand before popping it into his pocket.
You're not bothered about the bones found up at the chapel, then? Why should I be?
His father unfolded his newspaper and flicked it open.
That young woman from the museum phoned earlier. Rhoda? That's the one. Talking about organising the scaffolding for the windows. It's not going to be a 5-minute job. I don't doubt it, said Nate. When did she say she was coming? In a couple of weeks. Oh.
Nate pursed his lips.
Is that a problem? No, not at all. I thought she'd be back sooner.
Nate gathered up his phone and briefcase.
Right. I need to collect Isaac from Siobhan. I'll see you in a while.
Nate had Isaac every other weekend, as well as seeing him during the week. On those weekends, he tended to stay at Telton Hall. There were far more things for Isaac to do than when he was cooped up in Nate's little one-bedroom flat in town. Nate and Siobhan had somehow managed to navigate their divorce amicably, despite Siobhan ending up married to Nate's former best mate, Harrison. It had stung at the time, and both had promised nothing had been going on prior to the marriage breakdown. But it had been the death knell for his friendship, as well as his marriage. Nate pulled up outside the gates of the modern architectural statement property Siobhan and Harrison had had built for them the previous year. He reached over and pressed the buzzer.
Hi, it's me.
Come on in, Nate, Siobhan's voice came back. The gate mechanism kicked in, and the wrought ironwork slid back, allowing Nate to pull up on the driveway. He got out of the car, but didn't approach the door. Siobhan often invited him in, but Nate always politely refused. The one time he had accepted the invitation, at Isaac's insistence, Nate and Harrison had stood awkwardly in the kitchen. The high-tech, high-gloss, high-end kitchen with double bifold doors, where they tried to make small talk as if there was no water under the bridge for them. Nate had often wondered if he should have just punched Harrison on the jaw at the time he'd found out about their relationship, and that would have cleared the air. 3 years down the line, he was a bit too old for rolling around on the floor in a display of misplaced and immature machoism. Nate preferred to wait by the car for Isaac to come out, accompanied by Siobhan. Only today, there was no Isaac. Hi, Nate. Siobhan was looking as immaculate as ever, even in her casual dress-down fitwear like she was today. Nate was certain she had not purchased the outfit from the local supermarket.
Siobhan, everything okay?
He looked beyond her to see if Isaac was on his way. Yes, I wanted a quick word. She glanced back at the house briefly. I heard about the body up at the chapel.
Grapevine's working well.
Actually, it wasn't the grapevine. Isaac told me all about it. She sounded a little bit annoyed. I thought you might have said something.
Sorry, I didn't realise he'd taken it all in.
You know what he's like, Nate. He misses nothing.
He was in the other room.
That doesn't mean a thing. She folded her arms and frowned at him. You still should have told me.
Okay. Sorry, again.
He's non-stop looking up murders and cold cases on the computer. I've had to threaten to take his tablet away.
I'll speak to him.
Do. But as I said, I'd sooner you spoke to me first in future, so Harrison and I can manage it at home. Nate let out a sigh.
Message received.
She paused for a moment, giving him one of her reproachful looks. Right, I'll go and get him. Her face softened as she added, I'll warn you now, he's going to bend your ear reciting all the facts and figures of the unsolved cases since 1940.
Thanks for the heads up.
Nate exchanged a wry smile with Siobhan. It was much better these days, when they both veered away from confrontation. Besides, it would upset Siobhan's newly found karma, and she'd be off to her handcrafted willow meditation dome at the bottom of the garden for the next week, drinking mint tea and eating her organically grown avocado on locally produced wholemeal multi-seeded bread, or whatever it was she ate these days. Isaac came trundling out a short while later, with his rucksack on his back, and Siobhan carrying his weekend bag.
Hi, matey,
said Nate, ruffling his son's hair.
All set?
Hello, Dad. Isaac shrugged off his rucksack and climbed into the rear of Nate's car. Siobhan passed the bag she was carrying to Nate. His uniform is all in there, and his book bag. He needs to read to the end of the book before Monday. Make sure you fill out the reading log. There's also a homework sheet about a project they need to do. I've written down some ideas so that you can go through them with him. I thought... Nate cut her off.
It's okay, Siobhan. I think I'll be able to cope with Year 6 homework.
Siobhan looked as if she wanted to argue, but instead she pressed her mouth closed and ducked down to say goodbye to Isaac. Siobhan hadn't been wrong about Isaac memorising facts and figures. It began as they turned out onto the road. Did you know, in England and Wales there were 695 homicide victims in the year ending March 2020?
No, I didn't, replied Nate. How was school today?
Boring. The homicide rate in England and Wales for the year ending March 2020 was 11.7 per million population, with male homicides nearly 3 times as many as female homicides.
Why was school boring?
Literacy, maths, PE, reading, same as yesterday. There were 142 homicide victims aged between 16 to 24 years old.
Shall we talk about something else other than murder? Suggested Nate.
Are the police going to investigate the body at Grandad's chapel?
Well, it was a slight improvement on the conversation. No, it happened too long ago.
Is the chapel going to be knocked down still? Is Rhoda Sullivan, Sullivan, coming back to fix the window?
They're not knocking it down, they are just going to move it, explained Nate. And yes, I imagine that Rhoda Sullivan will have to come back.
I looked up where she worked, said Isaac.
Nate raised his eyebrows. Did you? What did you find out?
The Singlewood Museum has over 150 historic buildings. Some of them date back to the Middle Ages. Rhoda Sullivan works there as a conservationist and specialises in artefacts and stained glass.
Good research. Would you like to go there one day?
Nate wasn't sure why he'd suggested it, but the offer had left his mouth before he had time to consider the reasoning. Yes, please. Today?
Not today. There's not enough time.
Tomorrow?
Was there a reason why they couldn't go tomorrow? Was there a reason for them to go, other than that Isaac wanted to go? Did there need to be a reason?
I want to write about it for my project.
Well, that's settled then. We'll go tomorrow.
There. He'd said it, and he couldn't go back on his word to Isaac. By the time they'd had their supper at Telton Hall, Isaac had provided his grandfather with a few more homicide facts and figures, but since then had moved on to talking about Singlewood Museum. When Nate came back from doing the dishes, Isaac was sitting with his grandfather and showing him pictures of the different buildings that had been relocated to the museum. And here's a picture of Rhoda Sullivan.
So it is, said Jack.
Nate looked over his son's shoulder.
Can I see? Oh, you're right. She's working on a stained glass window by the look of it.
Rhoda was leaning over her workbench with a soldering iron in her hand. Her dark hair was tied up in a ponytail, and although she wasn't looking at the camera, there was just something about her body language and the intense but somehow enthusiastic look on her face as she carried out her work. It was the same expression he'd noticed when she was working at her laptop in the dining room. He scanned the caption that accompanied the photograph.
Says that she runs a workshop twice a year at the museum. She certainly knows her stuff, said Jack. Yeah, I think I'll take the ring with me and get her to have another look at it, said Nate. There might even be someone at the museum who can shed more light on it. I honestly don't know why you're bothering with an old worthless trinket, said Jack, getting up from his chair. Come on, Tink. I'm going to take the dog out.
The little terrier hopped up from beside the fireplace, ready for her usual early evening walk across the fields with her master. Nate watched his father head out. It was good he still took gentle exercise. He was a little more stooped these days, and not as agile on his feet, although the farming life had perhaps taken its toll on him earlier than had he not had a manual job. His father was a tough old sod, and his tenacity and stubbornness were good opponents for his advancing years. Nate sat down on the sofa and absent-mindedly took the ring from his pocket to have another look at it. He supposed it really was just a trinket, as his father had said. He wasn't even sure anyone at the museum would be interested in it. Isaac came and sat down next to him. What's that?
That's a ring which was found up at the chapel.
He avoided mentioning the remains.
Can I look?
Nate shook it from the little plastic bag into the palm of his son's hand.
It's been made from an old coin.
Isaac examined the ring and tried it on his finger before slipping it off and giving it back to Nate. He picked up the remote control.
Can I watch my programs? Yeah, sure. Aunt Aggie has a ring like that, said Isaac, as he flicked through the channels. Has she?
Nate stopped as he registered what Isaac had said.
Wait, Aunt Aggie has a ring like this? Yes, exactly the same.
Oh, cool. Doctor Who. Isaac's attention was now fully on the TV screen.
Isaac?
Nate picked up the remote control and paused the TV.
Sorry, mate. Quick question, then you can put it back on. How do you know Aunt Aggie has a ring like this one? I've seen it. In her sewing tin. When did you see it? When it was her birthday and we had cake.
Isaac swiped back the remote control and restarted his program. Nate knew he would be hard-pressed to get much more out of his son. He frowned as he looked at the ring. He had no reason to doubt Isaac's recollection. He was pretty good when it came to remembering stuff. As for Aggie's sewing tin, it was an old sweet tin she kept in her cupboard. She'd had it for years, or at least as long as Nate could remember. But what was an old ring doing in her sewing tin, and why hadn't she mentioned it before, when he told her what the police had found? Maybe she didn't know the ring was there. It felt significant, and Nate didn't know why. He got up from the sofa, and with his hands in his pockets, looked out of the living room window, down the driveway to Telton Cottage. He needed an excuse to look in the sewing tin without raising suspicion, and he really wanted to find that ring before he went to see Rhoda the next day. By the time his dad got back from his walk around the lower field with Tink, Nate had made up his mind to quickly see Aggie.
Won't be long, he called from the doorway. Just need to pop over to the cottage.
He purposely didn't wait for his father to ask why.
Hello, Nathan.
Aggie greeted him as he came into the cottage. She was probably the only person who called him by his full name.
I thought you'd have locked up by now, said Nate,
giving Aggie a peck on the cheek.
It's one thing leaving your door unlocked during the day, but honestly, Aggie, you really should lock it by tea time.
She waved his comments away with her hand.
Yes, I just forgot.
Nate gave her his best "did you really" look, but decided not to get on the wrong side of her, seeing as he needed her help.
I just wanted to ask you something, he began. I was showing Isaac the ring that was found up at the chapel, and he was adamant he'd seen one just like it in your sewing tin. Can I have a quick look?
Aggie's face stiffened.
A ring? In the sewing tin? I don't think so. Why would I have a ring like the one found?
I'm not sure. It's quite a coincidence.
Nate took the ring from his pocket.
It looks like this, apparently.
Aggie put her glasses on and took a closer look at the handmade jewellery.
Oh, a ring like that.
She dropped it back into Nate's hand.
The POWs used to make them all the time. I may well have one in the tin, although goodness knows what it's doing in there.
Can I look?
If you must. Nate didn't miss the hint of irritation in his aunt's voice, but undeterred, he went to the cupboard in the dining room, and from the shelf he took the tin, placing it on the table. He prized off the lid and was confronted with a selection of threads and needles, a tiny pair of scissors, a coiled-up tape measure, and other odds and sods, all on a bed of buttons.
It's like stepping back in time, said Nate. When did you last use the tin?
Oh, I can't remember. Never liked sewing. Nate took out the sewing items so he could rummage around in the sea of buttons. Wooden toggles, leather ones, some more fancy ones shaped like flowers or with gold embellishments, and plenty of white plastic buttons in various sizes. It was at the bottom of the tin he spotted the ring, easily overlooked among the contents. Nate picked it out.
Here it is. Isaac was right.
He showed the ring to his aunt. Well, there's a turn-up. Aggie donned a surprised look. The POWs were always giving these out to the locals. I think they thought it would impress us.
Did one of them give it to you?
Aggie shrugged. I can't remember. Probably. Or maybe one of the girls at Telton Hall gave it to me, or left it behind. It was all a long time ago.
Can I borrow it to show Rhoda Sullivan from the museum?
I suppose so.
Just one more thing. Do you know where the family Bible is?
What do you want that for? A frown creased Aggie's brow.
We thought it might give us some clue to who was here at the farm, and who the remains might be.
Aggie gave a disapproving scoff. I've no clue where the family Bible is. If anyone knows, it will be your father. As Nate walked back over to Telton Hall, he tried to work out whether this was important or not. Was another ring significant? The POWs made them. One was found with the remains. Was it a coincidence? Ultimately, did it make any difference to the police's decision not to investigate? Probably not, but all the same, something about it all was beginning to bother him. By the time he'd reached Telton Hall, he'd given himself a talking to. He was trying to make a connection, because that's what Rhoda wanted to hear. He needed to get a grip of his usual pragmatic, no-nonsense self and stop trying to satisfy Rhoda's need to solve a mystery that didn't exist. Chapter 14. Rhoda, 2022. Rhoda had been surprised to receive a call from Nate Hartwell the previous evening, explaining that he was bringing his son over to the museum, and he wanted to show her the ring found at the chapel. I spoke to your dad earlier, just to keep him up to date with the schedule of works. I didn't think I'd be back down for a couple of weeks, but on reflection, there are a few things I need to double-check before work can start to remove the window. I'm a bit pushed for time this coming week, so was hoping I could pay a weekend visit.
There's no reason why you can't,
Nate had replied.
I was planning on bringing Isaac up to the museum tomorrow. He's keen to have a look around. You could drive back down with us in the afternoon. I mean, in your own car.
Naturally.
Yes, naturally. So, well, it's up to you.
Rhoda had smiled to herself at his awkwardness. So I'll see you in the morning?
Yes, look forward to it. Isaac will look forward to it. I will as well. He had hurried to qualify.
Nate and Isaac arrived just after 10, which had given Rhoda time to have a cup of tea and set out a small glass project she used when the local primary school kids came. She wasn't sure if Isaac would want to participate in anything hands-on, but at least the opportunity would be there. A small tap at the door had Rhoda looking up. She could see Nate's face through the glass and waved him in. You made it. Did you have a good journey?
Yes, all very straightforward, thanks to the sat-nav.
Nate smiled at her. Rhoda said hello to Isaac, who was slowly undertaking a full 360-degree examination of the workshop.
Isaac, say hello to Rhoda, encouraged Nate.
Oh, don't worry, said Rhoda, smiling to reassure Nate she wasn't at all offended. Do you want a drink? Tea? Coffee? I have water, or I think there's some squash over in the corner. It's Helen's who does the spinning, but she won't mind. For some reason, the first 5 or 10 minutes felt a little awkward. Rhoda wasn't sure if that was coming from her or from the Hartwells, but by the time they'd finished their drinks and talked about the traffic, the weather, and how nice the setting of Singlewood was, they all appeared to relax a little. "Did you want to have a go at making a stained glass window light?" Rosa asked Isaac, as she gathered up the empty cups. Isaac looked at the workbench where Rhoda had laid out the pieces of glass, which, when put together, would be the Superman logo. Isaac shook his head. "No, thank you." "You might enjoy it," said Nate. He looked apologetically at Rhoda. "No, thank you," repeated the 10-year-old. "That's absolutely fine," said Rhoda. "I like honesty." "Yeah, so that ring," said Nate, pulling a small zip-sealed bag from his pocket, as if he was about to do a drugs deal. He placed it on the workbench. "The police gave it back to me. I asked Dad what he wanted to do with it, but he didn't seem bothered, so I thought you might like to have a look at it." "It's the same as Aunt Aggie's ring," said Isaac. Rhoda looked questioningly at Nate. "I was just about to come to that," said Nate. "Isaac said he'd seen one over at my aunt's house, in her sewing tin of all places. Anyway, sure enough, there was." He produced another ring from his pocket and placed it next to the first. "They look identical to me." "Wow, your aunt had this?" Rhoda picked them both up and inspected them closely. "Did she say where she got hers from?" "She couldn't remember. Said the POWs used to make them and give them out all the time." "So the—" Rhoda glanced at Isaac. "The chapel business, that can probably be pinpointed to around the time there were POWs at Telton Hall." "That's what I concluded." "Shame your aunt doesn't remember how she got it," mused Rhoda. "Do you mind if I take a couple of photos of these? It might be nice as an anecdote to add to the display when the chapel is moved here." "Be my guest." "I can show you where they are going to site the chapel if you like." Rhoda went over to her desk to get her camera. "I'll take you both on a personal tour of the houses." "That would be good, thanks. You'd like that, wouldn't you, Isaac?" "Yes, I want to see the building that has a toilet over the garden." Nate looked confused, and Rhoda laughed. "That's perfectly correct, and all the kids want to see that. Upstairs at one of the houses, there's a little closet with a hole cut out as a toilet seat. It overhangs the house, and everything collects in a heap in the garden below, obviously long before mains drains." Nate pulled a grim expression, which made Rhoda laugh again. As Isaac didn't seem particularly interested in any practical stained glass session, Rhoda was only too happy to take them around the site. The weather was being kind to them, despite it having rained during the night. The sky was clear, and the sun was warming on their faces. "It's a bigger site than I imagined," said Nate, as they walked around to the main square. "And these houses are brilliant. It's like stepping back in time." "Exactly what they are trying to achieve," replied Rhoda. "Obviously, the houses and buildings are all from various centuries, but this area is supposed to represent the main market square where people would come to buy and sell things. They often have days where the volunteers dress up in old-fashioned clothing, and you can buy some of their traditionally made crafts. There's also a big summer fair, and another in the autumn, where they have dog shows, food stalls, pony rides, heavy horse shows, ploughing competitions, loads of different stuff. You should come to one." They explored inside some of the buildings, which Isaac seemed to be enjoying as he led the way with the map Rhoda had given him. "This is an old Victorian school," said Rhoda, as they approached a small flint-built structure. They stepped inside, where from behind a barrier they could see the wooden benches and blackboards set up, with slates and chalk laid out. "Bit different to what your classroom looks like, I expect." "Victorian. Victorian. It is a descriptive term for the time when Victoria was Queen of England, from 1837 to 1901, announced Isaac. Rhoda exchanged a look with Nate. "Correct?" "We are doing about the Victorians at school," said Isaac. "I've got to do a project on it." "Do you want to take some photographs of the classroom?" asked Rhoda. Good idea, said Nate, taking his phone from his pocket. I forgot all about the project. Mum said I had to remind you. Yes, I've no doubt she did. Nate may have tried to hide the weariness from his voice when he replied to his son, but Rhoda hadn't missed it. Years of micro-analysing adult conversations while she was in care and foster homes to try to get some idea of where her unstable childhood might take a turn next, being able to mentally prepare herself for the unforeseen, had proved a hard habit to break going into adulthood. She stood back as Nate took some pictures, and then she offered to take one of Nate and Isaac together. Making memories, as they say. She passed the phone back, realising she hadn't been able to hide the cynicism from her voice. She attempted a rather more light-hearted pitch. You can never have enough photos. An unexpected feeling of sadness swept over her. She physically shrugged to rid herself of the emotion. Photos of her childhood had been few and far between, and most of the ones she did have weren't always attached to happy times. Right, let's go and find that toilet. They spent the next hour and a half wandering around the houses and buildings. They visited the house with the toilet in the bedroom, which overhung the building. Isaac found it hilarious, and Nate had to apologise for his son's toilet humour. Sorry, anything to do with toilets and bottoms is highly amusing for a 10-year-old. They carried on exploring some more of the outlying buildings, which were spread further out and more secluded. It's supposed to represent how rural England would have been structured, explained Rhoda. Outside the main village, there is the odd house here and there. The walk took them up the hill and through the wooded area, passing by the stables where the 2 Shire horses were, and on beyond the pigsty. It was another 45 minutes before they had completed their circuit. That was great, said Nate. I really enjoyed it. What did you think, Isaac? I liked the toilet. Rhoda laughed along with Nate. What did you think of the Victorian school? Didn't like that. It was boring. Isaac, don't be rude. Nate turned to Rhoda. Sorry. Hey, don't apologise. As I said, I like honesty. Well, Isaac can be a little too honest sometimes. Nate gave an apologetic smile. He's just a typical school kid. She noticed Nate's smile falter. Yeah, typical school kid. I'm hungry, said Isaac. Hungry, feeling or showing the need for food. In that case, said Rhoda, I'll show you where the cafe is. Perhaps you and your dad can have some lunch while I pack away a few things in my studio. Then we can head down to Telton Hall. How does that sound? Are you having lunch with us? Asked Isaac, looking at the leaflet in his hand. No, I've got a few things to do. You're more than welcome to join us, said Nate. My treat, to say thank you for giving up your time this morning to show us around. That's very kind, but honestly, I've got a sandwich back at the studio. What sort of sandwich? Asked Isaac. Ham. Yummy. A ham sandwich, said Nate. That doesn't sound very exciting. Nothing wrong with ham. Nate raised his eyebrows. I'm sure the cafe has something a bit more exciting. If Rhoda was honest, the ham sandwich had been there since the previous day and was not at its best after a night in the fridge. Before she could think of an excuse, she found herself relenting and agreeing to go to lunch with them. This is the end of CD3. The book continues on CD4.